Welcome back to another story on Eclipse Wizardry. This time, we're bringing you, Bellatrix Black was saved by Harry before Azkaban and ancient Black family magic bound her to him. Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, The wrong moment. The Battle of Hogwarts was supposed to end cleanly. That was the thing about battles, Harry had learned, they never did. There was always one more variable, one more desperate measure, one more idiot on either side willing to do something catastrophically stupid in the final minutes when everything was already decided. This time, the idiot had been Yaxley, cornered in the Great Hall with 3 Aurors closing in, spitting blood and apparently willing to take half the castle with him rather than surrender. He'd detonated something, not a spell, exactly, more like a ritual charge, crude and catastrophic, and the resulting implosion of wild magic had punched a hole in the fabric of everything. Harry had been standing directly in the middle of it. He remembered the sound, a tone so low it was more felt than heard, resonating through the floor, through his bones, through the air itself. He remembered the way the Great Hall simply ceased to be around him, the stone walls going transparent and then absent, replaced by a blinding white that had no texture or warmth to it. He remembered thinking, with the particular clarity of someone who had already died once and found the experience less dramatic than advertised, "Oh, this is bad." Then the white swallowed him, and he fell through something that wasn't space and wasn't time, but was apparently both. He landed in a forest. Not gracefully. He hit the ground shoulder first, rolled through wet leaves and mud, and came up on one knee with his wand already in his hand, gasping, heart slamming against his ribs. The forest was dark and dense, old growth by the look of it, trees thick enough that 3 people couldn't link arms around them, their canopies so interlocked overhead that the sky was barely a rumor of gray between the branches. Cold. The air was cold and damp and smelled like rain and pine resin and the specific earthy rot of leaves that had been decomposing since autumn. He stayed on one knee for a long moment and catalogued the damage. His glasses were intact. His wand was in his hand. His body, from the quick internal check he'd learned to perform automatically during the war, was bruised but functional. His robes were the battle-torn ones from Hogwarts, still charred at the left sleeve where Greyback had gotten close. His bag was gone, left behind in the hall. Harry stood up. The forest had no recognizable features. The light was the flat grey of late afternoon in late autumn, and the trees could have been anywhere in Britain. He cast a quiet hominum revelio in a wide sweep and felt it bounce back at him, no humans nearby. Then he tried to accio the bag he knew wasn't there, because old habits, and when nothing happened he breathed out slowly through his nose and took stock. He'd felt the magic that had hit him. He'd felt plenty of wild magic in his life, the chamber, the graveyard, the ministry, the forest, and this had been different from all of them. It hadn't been destructive, precisely. It had been temporal. Something in Yaxley's ritual charge, some miscalculation or deliberate design, had interacted catastrophically with the ambient magic of the battle and punched him through time rather than simply killing him. Which was, he supposed, either very good luck or very bad luck depending entirely on where, and when, he'd landed. He cast Tempest. The spell gave him the date without fuss, November 14, 1979. Harry stood with the glowing numbers hanging in the dark air in front of him for a moment. 1979. He was 21 years old and it was 1979, which meant he'd been sent back 22 years, which meant the war he'd just finished was the war that hadn't started yet, which meant Voldemort was at the height of his power, which meant everyone he'd ever lost was still alive, which meant... He closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Breathed in. Breathed out. Then he opened them and got on with it, because falling apart in a dark forest had never helped anyone and he'd learned that lesson the hard way. He needed to establish his location, figure out what resources he had available, and decide on a course of action before the ambient magic of the late 1970s First Wizarding War got him killed. He had his wand, an elder wand that had answered to him since he'd taken it from Voldemort's hand, technically the most powerful magical instrument in existence, though Harry had always found that particular fact more annoying than impressive because it attracted attention he didn't want. He had the clothes on his back. He had 18 years of magical education, 2.5 years of active wartime experience, and a detailed working knowledge of the major events of the First Wizarding War. He also had absolutely no paperwork, no established identity, and no way to explain who he was to anyone without sounding deranged. Fine, he thought, and pushed through the trees toward what looked like a ridge line that might give him a view of the surrounding landscape. He'd gotten perhaps 30 meters when he heard the spell fire. It wasn't distant, 200 meters at most, northeast, muffled by the trees but unmistakable to someone who'd spent the better part of 2 years distinguishing the crack and hiss of different hexes by sound alone. There was a pattern to it, 3 quick bursts, a pause, 2 more, a longer pause, then rapid fire from at least 3 different sources against what sounded like one. The one was holding, but only just. The magic was bright enough that he could see the pulses of it through the tree trunks even at this distance, blue, white, and red, and the sickly yellow-green of a hex he didn't immediately identify. He should stay out of it. Walking into a firefight in the middle of the First Wizarding War, blind to context, blind to allegiances, armed with nothing but a wand he wasn't supposed to have yet, every reasonable instinct said wait, observe, learn more first. Harry was already moving toward the spell fire. He moved fast and quiet, the way Moody had drilled into him and the way 3 years of running had made automatic. Low through the undergrowth, wand up, using the trees as cover. He got to 60 meters and dropped behind the root shelf of a fallen oak to look. The clearing was small, a natural gap in the canopy where a stream cut through and the tree roots gave way to muddy flat ground. 3 figures, masked, gray-robed, Death Eater masks catching the light of their own spell fire, were working in a coordinated triangle, pressing inward on the far side of the stream where a single figure stood on a mossy outcrop of rock, casting in rapid brilliant bursts that were, Harry noticed immediately, extraordinarily good. The lone figure was a woman. Late 20s, dark hair wild around her face, black robes. She was dueling 3 people simultaneously and she was winning on points, hitting 2 of the 3 with deflected strikes, moving constantly, reading the patterns before they completed. But she was outnumbered and the triangle formation was closing, and even the best duelist in Britain couldn't hold a 3-way compressing attack at close range indefinitely. She had maybe 90 seconds, Harry estimated, before the angles got her. He recognized her before he saw her face, which was the strange thing. He recognized the way she moved, that particular aggressive grace, weight always forward, never retreating when she could press, and the magic itself, that signature flavor of Black family power, wild and deep and faintly blue at the edges of the light. Then she turned slightly and the clearing's ambient light caught her profile and confirmed it. Bellatrix Black. Not Lestrange yet, this was 1979, the marriage was still months away from what Harry could recall. She was younger than the versions of her he'd seen in the mirror, in memories, in battle. Not unrecognizably younger, but enough. The hollows of Azkaban hadn't found her face yet. She was sharp and alive and radiating the kind of furious focused energy that was, without the years of dark imprisonment and torture to warp it, almost something you could admire. She was also about to be captured or killed, and Harry had enough knowledge of First Wizarding War history to know that her capture here, well before she should have gone to Azkaban, would change things in ways that cascaded unpredictably. She was supposed to go to Azkaban in 1981. Not now. He also knew, and this was the reasoning he gave himself, clean and tactical, that a Bellatrix Black who went to Azkaban at a different time, under different circumstances, with her capture attributed to different people, would alter the timeline in ways he couldn't calculate or control. Better to maintain the shape of events where possible and manage the deviations carefully. He was already in motion before he'd finished the thought, which suggested the reasoning had been retroactive. He came out of the tree-lean on the Death Eater's blind side and hit the one on the left with a silent depulso powerful enough to send the man airborne, and he was airborne for an impressively long time, crashing through the brush 20 meters back and not getting up. The other two spun, and Harry was already under the second one's guard, stupefied at contact range, the red bolt so close it singed the man's mask before he went down. The third one, to his credit, was quick. He turned and cast simultaneously, and the spell he chose was a good one, a binding hex, moderately powerful, aimed squarely at Harry's center mass. Harry stepped sideways by about 3 inches and it passed his ribs without touching, and then he looked at the Death Eater for just a moment, a look that said several things without words, and said, "Don't." The Death Eater ran. Harry watched him go and didn't pursue. 3 was down and neutralized, and one conscious fugitive disappearing into a dark forest served his purposes fine. Let someone go back to Voldemort confused and lacking information. He turned toward the stream. Bellatrix Black was standing on her rock with her wand leveled at his chest and an expression on her face that was equal parts suspicion, assessment, and the specific outrage of someone who has just been robbed of an interesting fight. "Who are you?" she said. Not a question, a demand with a wand behind it. "Somebody who just saved you 3 seconds ahead of those angles getting you boxed," Harry said, "which you already know, so maybe hold off on the killing curse for the length of a conversation." The wand didn't lower. Her eyes moved over him in quick sharp increments, reading him the way he'd just been reading her, inventory and threat assessment. He let her look. He had nothing to hide and a non-threatening posture was the last thing that would work with her anyway. She'd see through performed meekness in about 4 seconds. "I didn't need saving," she said. "You had 90 seconds, at most. The third one was going to break left and you'd have had the sun angle," he glanced up, corrected, "the sky angle against you when he did." Her eyes narrowed fractionally. He'd said the right thing, she knew he was right, and she respected that he'd said it plainly rather than trying to charm her or diminish her. "That still doesn't answer who you are." "Harry," he said. "That's what you get for now. Just Harry. Just Harry." The wand was still up, but something in her expression had shifted from active threat to calculating patience. She was trying to place him, age, bearing, wand hand, the way he'd moved through the Death Eaters, and finding that she couldn't. He watched her mind work behind her eyes and thought, not for the first time, that there was a specific tragedy in Bellatrix Black's intelligence. She'd been raised in a world that had handed it entirely over to cruelty and called that an improvement. "You're not Auror," she said. "They don't move like that. You're not one of mine, I know every." She stopped. "I'm not anyone's," Harry said. "I'm a free agent with opinions about your continued existence, apparently." She came off the rock in one clean motion, crossing the stream without looking at it, and stopped about 8 feet from him. Close enough that the wand was a serious proposition. She was taller than he'd thought, nearly his height, and the dark eyes were relentlessly sharp in a way that Azkaban had kept but had never created. This was just her. "Why?" she said. "Because you weren't supposed to be caught tonight," he said, which was true in 2 different senses that she'd only understand one of. "And because those 3 were going to hand you to Crouch, and I find Bartemius Crouch's opinions on anything less interesting than silence." Something very close to amusement crossed her face and vanished. "You know Crouch." "I know of him. He's self-righteous in the specific way that makes people do stupid things and call it justice." He paused. "We should move. The one that ran went somewhere." She glanced at the 2 unconscious Death Eaters on the ground with an expression that was complicated and quickly shuddered, and then she looked at him again with that flat assessing gaze. "You saved 3 Death Eaters worth of trouble for a free agent with opinions," she said. "What do you want?" "Nothing yet," Harry said honestly. "Let's get out of the forest first." She held the look for 3 more seconds, and he could see her weighing it, the tactical reality that she needed to move, the philosophical problem of owing anything to a stranger, the specific pride of Bellatrix Black that would rather walk into a bad situation under her own power than accept help gracefully. Then she turned on her heel and walked north, apparently having made a decision. Harry followed. They moved quickly and in silence through the dark trees. She was good in the forest, quiet, economical, not wasting energy on speed that would cost noise. He matched her pace without effort and she didn't look back to check on him, which said something about how much attention she was paying peripherally. Quite a lot, it turned out. Twice she changed direction without announcement or visible reason and both times he could, a moment later, identify why: a sound ahead, a gap in the tree line that would have exposed them to the ridge. She was navigating by a map in her head. "Where are we?" he asked, quietly. "Wiltshire. Eastern Edge." Short, informational, no wasted syllables. "Malfoy Land?" The look she threw back over her shoulder had a complicated edge to it. "Adjacent." Which meant she'd been operating in friendly territory and the 3 Death Eaters had been working against her, which meant this was internal, factionalism, a mission gone sideways, someone who'd wanted her removed for reasons that had nothing to do with the Order of the Phoenix. Harry filed that away. The First Wizarding War was not, he knew from Dumbledore's memories and the historical record, a clean binary of good against evil. It was a war, with all the lateral violence and political maneuvering that entailed. They broke out of the forest onto a narrow lane, one of those old Wiltshire tracks that had been a Roman road and then a medieval drove path and was now just a strip of cracked tarmac going between 2 hedgerows, and Bellatrix stopped. The night was clearer here, the sky showing between clouds, and the lane was empty in both directions. "That's far enough for now," she said, turning to face him. "I'll be on my way." "Sure," Harry said. She looked at him. He looked at her. "You're going to follow me," she said. "Hadn't planned to," he said honestly. He had no plan for any of this. He had a date, November 1979, and a wand and the rubble of good intentions. Something happened then, and neither of them did it. It came from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously, a pulse of magic that wasn't a spell and wasn't ambient, that had the specific character of something ancient being activated rather than cast. It moved through the air between them like a wave of pressure, warm and deep, and Harry felt it pass through his chest and settle there, low and resonant, like a second heartbeat establishing itself alongside his own. It didn't hurt. It didn't feel like attack magic or curse magic. It felt like something recognizing something. Bellatrix made a sharp sound, not a scream, nothing so undignified, but a short hard sound of someone who has been startled by their own body, and pressed one hand flat against her sternum. Her eyes went wide and then immediately furious. "What did you do?" she said, and her wand was up and her voice was perfectly level in a way that meant the opposite of calm. "Nothing," Harry said, which was true and also completely useless as answers went. "What did you do?" "I didn't cast anything." He spread his hands, wand loosely held, deliberately open. "You felt it too." "Of course I felt it, it went through my..." She stopped. Her eyes moved over him with a completely different quality now, not tactical assessment, something more fundamental, more alarmed. "That's not possible." "What is it?" Harry said, because whatever had just happened was clearly something she had context for that he didn't. She didn't answer immediately. She was breathing carefully, the kind of deliberate breathing that means the person is managing something significant. Her left hand was still at her sternum. Her wand hand was rock steady, which told him more about her than anything she might have said. "Tell me your full name," she said. "Harry," he repeated. "Your full name," she said, and the wand came up another inch. Harry looked at her for a moment and made a calculation. The magic had already happened. Whatever it was, his name wasn't going to change it, and denying it to her while she was clearly in the grip of something that frightened her was going to make the next 10 minutes significantly worse. "Harry James Potter," he said. The name landed like a stone in water. Her expression went through several things quickly. Recognition wasn't one of them, because she wouldn't know that name, not in 1979, and landed on something he couldn't quite read. She lowered her wand. Slowly. Not because she'd decided to trust him, but because something else had apparently taken priority. "Potter," she said slowly. There's no Potter of your age with that kind of magic. I'd know. There is now, Harry said. That magic, she said, and stopped again, and seemed to be having a private argument with herself that showed only in the set of her jaw. Old families have wards. Recognition patterns. The Black family has, she stopped. Has what? Harry said. The anger that came into her eyes then was brilliant and cold, like watching sunlight on a blade. The Black family has an ancient bonding provision in its blood magic. An emergency clause. Invoked when a Black is saved from a mortal situation by an outside wizard of sufficient power and, she said a word in what sounded like very old Latin and then looked at him like he'd done it on purpose. I didn't know, Harry said. It doesn't require knowledge, she said. It requires action. You pulled me out of a mortal situation and the family magic activated, and now, she pressed her lips together. And now we're bound. The word sat between them. Harry heard it and thought, with the part of his mind that ran tactical assessments whether he liked it or not, that this explained the feeling in his chest. That resonance, that secondary pulse, warm and deep and alive. Not his magic. Or rather, his magic, and something else alongside it, and the two of them fitted together in a way that didn't feel accidental. What does that mean? He said. Practically speaking. It means, Bellatrix said, that I cannot cause you lasting harm, which is profoundly inconvenient. It means we're magically tethered in ways that will become clear over the next several days. It means the House of Black, by blood law, recognizes you as another stop. The jaw worked slightly. As a claimant. A claimant to what? Everything. The word came out quietly and with tremendous suppressed violence. House. Magic. Name. The whole bloody edifice. Harry stared at her. She stared back at him and the fury in her face was impeccably controlled and absolutely volcanic underneath that control, and he had the very clear impression of standing at the base of a mountain that was deciding whether or not to erupt. I didn't plan this, he said. I know, she said. Which is the only reason you're still standing. I'll take that, Harry said. A silence. Not comfortable, nothing about this was comfortable, but a working one. The lane was still empty. Somewhere in the distance an owl sounded. You have to come with me, she said, with the tone of someone swallowing something indigestible. Where? Somewhere the Death Eaters who just tried to have me quietly murdered won't think to look, she said. And somewhere I can access resources and work out exactly what magnitude of disaster you've just stumbled us both into. Both, Harry noted. Don't, she said sharply. I wasn't going to say anything. You were going to make a point about joint responsibility. The thought had occurred to me. She turned north again, pulled her robe straight with the snap of someone concluding a meeting, and said, keep up. Harry kept up. They walked for about 10 minutes in the kind of silence that's doing quite a lot of work. The hedge-lined lane gave onto a wider road and she apparat, side along, which she did by grabbing his wrist without preamble, no question, no announcement, and they landed in a village. Small, dark, sleeping. Georgian houses set back from cobbled streets, a church with a squat Norman tower, a market cross. Wiltshire still, by the feel of the stone and the particular darkness of the sky. She led him to a public house that was closed, pushed through the door with a murmured word that unlocked it, and they went inside. The taproom smelled of old beer and wood smoke. She didn't light the room, cast a small focused illumination, a tight cone of silver light, and took them through the taproom and up a steep back stair to a first-floor room that turned out to be a private sitting room, fire laid but unlit, 2 armchairs and a writing desk. She lit the fire with a careless flick and sat in one of the chairs and looked at him with the expression of someone doing very complicated maths. Harry sat in the other chair and waited. You're not from here, she said. This time. He looked at her steadily. He didn't deny it. The magic is wrong, she said. Not wrong, It's pure, it's clean, it's extraordinary actually. That admission cost her something and she moved past it quickly, but there's a temporal displacement signature around you that I've seen exactly once, in an academic text. You came through time. Yes. From how far? The future. How far? Far enough that I know a great deal about what happens next, he said. And I'm going to be very selective about how much of that I share, with anyone, because knowing the future is a different thing from being able to use it. You're not going to tell me, not tonight, he said. Tonight I need to know what you know about the bond and what the practical implications are. Tomorrow I'll know more about what I'm willing to say. She held the look. Her fingers drummed once on the arm of the chair and stopped. You're either the most extraordinary liar in Britain or you're precisely what you appear to be. What do I appear to be? She was quiet for a moment. The fire had caught and was throwing warm light across the room, and it softened the sharp angles of her face without doing anything to the sharpness in her eyes. Someone who knows exactly how dangerous everything is, she said slowly, and has stopped being afraid of it. Harry didn't say anything to that. The bond, she said, after a moment. House of Black Blood Magic. It's called, in the oldest texts, the Vinculum Antiquum. The ancient chain. It predates the statute of secrecy, predates the current understanding of magical law. It was designed for a very different world, one where great houses fell and rose based on who protected whom, and protection had magical as well as social weight. It binds us, Harry said. How? In layers, she said. The first layer, the one that activated immediately, is the recognition layer. The magic identifies us both as participants. That's the pulse we felt. The second layer activates over the following few days and is more complex. It's a resonance bonding, means our magic begins to recognize and respond to each other. Our spells will work in combination without deliberate effort. Our instincts about each other's intentions will become more accurate. A pause. More accurate than either of us would like, I suspect. And the third layer? She looked at him with an expression that contained several things and showed none of them. The third layer takes longer. It's contingent. It may not activate at all, depending on whether the conditions are met. What conditions? Genuine mutual regard, she said, crisp and clinical. The magic is old enough to have been designed before people understood how to fake emotions convincingly. It reads intent, not performance. She looked away toward the fire. It won't activate between enemies who've learned to tolerate each other. It requires something more than that. Harry considered this. And if it does activate? It's permanent, she said. Not painful. Not constraining. The texts are very clear that it's not designed as a prison, it doesn't bind actions or choices. But the magical tether becomes a permanent feature of both our magical architectures. We'd share a degree of magical awareness, emotional, intentional, not telepathic, for the rest of our lives. The fire popped. An ember fell. Right, Harry said. Right, she repeated, with a tone that suggested his composure in the face of this information was either admirable or offensive and she hadn't decided which. You don't seem distressed. I'm processing, he said. Distress comes after processing. Usually. And if it doesn't activate to the third stage? Then we remain magically recognizable to each other and the House of Black Blood law stands, which is, she paused, with visible reluctance, complicated enough on its own. Because it names me as a claimant. Because it names you as a claimant, she confirmed, and the House of Black has enemies and allies and obligations that are entirely unrelated to the Dark Lord's war, and the blood law of the house is taken very seriously by people who care about such things, which is to say most of magical Britain over 40. Harry looked at her steadily. Who were the 3 Death Eaters in the forest? The change in subject caught her. Something shifted in her face, the analytical poise fractured slightly, replaced by something more complicated and more human. Lestrange men, she said. Associates of Rodolphius. Rodolphius Lestrange. Her betrothed, by arrangement. A man who was going to be her husband in a matter of months, in the original timeline. He sent people to take you out? He sent people to retrieve me, she said, with precision. Rodolphius has grown concerned about my independence on certain missions. He expressed this concern through official channels and was ignored, and so he expressed it through unofficial ones. A pause. He wasn't trying to have me killed. He was trying to have me brought back, and the methods he chose were 3-on-1 compression formation with hexes flying, Harry said flatly. Vigorous, she finished. He is a man of vigorous methods. That's not someone who loves you, Harry said. That's someone who owns you in his head. Her eyes cut to him, sharp and cold. I didn't ask for your assessment of my personal life. You brought it up, Harry said, unmoved. I gave you relevant context, and I responded to it. Another silence. This one had edges. You're very difficult, she said at last, and it came out with a quality Harry couldn't quite name. It wasn't quite complaint, wasn't quite admiration. Somewhere between. I've been told, he said. What do we do tonight? We stay here. I've used this room before, it's layered with notice me not and anti-apparition wards of my own. Tomorrow morning I need to access resources and we need to make decisions about the bond before the second layer activates, because the resonance will be disorienting without preparation. She paused. There's one bed. I'll sleep in the chair, Harry said. He pulled his wand and transfigured the nearest cushion into a reasonable blanket without ceremony. Unless that's going to cause a problem. She looked at the chair and the blanket with an expression that he suspected, in someone with less control, would have been bewilderment. No, she said. It's not going to cause a problem. Good. Do you want to set a watch? I've warded the building. I'll set a watch anyway, Harry said. 4 hours on, 4 off. I'll take first. He settled in the chair, pulled the blanket up, and closed his eyes. Not sleeping, not yet, just sorting. Behind his eyelids the day arranged itself, the great hall, the white, the fall, the forest, the spellfire, her. The bond. The pulse of it still lived in his chest, a low warmth that was entirely new and completely uninvited and was, he had to admit, not unpleasant in the way that certain uncomfortable truths are not unpleasant once you've stopped fighting them. He heard the creak of the second chair. The shift of her settling in, the quiet rustle of her robes. The fire breathing low. Potter, she said. He opened one eye. Yes. The firelight was behind her and her face was in shadow, and he couldn't read her expression. The pause before she spoke lasted long enough to mean she'd discarded several versions of the sentence. Why did you really save me, she said. Not the tactical reason. The real one. Harry looked at the ceiling. The question deserved an honest answer, and the honest answer was something he was still working out. Because you were going to go to Azkaban, he said carefully. Not tonight, later. And I've seen what Azkaban does to people. I've seen what it made you. He paused. I didn't want to watch it happen again when I had the chance to do something about it. A silence. He heard her breathing. You know what I become, she said quietly. Not afraid, just certain, and the certainty had a weight to it. I knew what you became, he said. Past tense. The timelines changed already. Is that, she said slowly, meant to be comforting? It's meant to be true, he said. Comfort is something you can decide about later. Another pause. Longer this time. Get some sleep, Potter, Bellatrix Black said, and there was something in her voice that was not warmth, exactly, but was something adjacent to it, something that hadn't quite been there at the start of the conversation, something the evening's extraordinary events had apparently scraped into existence despite everyone's better intentions. Harry closed his eyes. Outside, the Wiltshire dark pressed against the windows, and in his chest the bond pulsed steady and low, already learning the rhythm of a heartbeat that wasn't his own. Chapter 2, The Chain Between Them. Harry woke at 3 in the morning to Bellatrix trying to leave. He knew she was trying to leave before he opened his eyes, which was the first concrete evidence that the bond's second layer had already started moving faster than either of them had anticipated. It wasn't a sound that woke him. She was quiet, genuinely quiet, the kind of trained silence that spoke to years of operating in hostile environments. It was something else. A directional pull, like a compass needle registering north, except north in this case was toward the door and moving away from him, and the sensation was clear and insistent enough that it dragged him out of a dead sleep with his hand already on his wand. "Don't," he said, without opening his eyes. The movement stopped. He opened his eyes. She was 6 feet from the door, fully dressed, her traveling cloak on, wand at her side. The fire had burned to coals and the room was dark and orange-shadowed. She was looking at him with the expression of someone who has been caught doing something they weren't going to apologize for. "I was getting air," she said. "Through the ceiling?" Harry said. He could feel the direction of her, that was new, faint but distinct, like knowing where the door is in a dark room. She'd been heading up and out. Apparition point on the roof, probably. "Sit down. I don't take orders from, you were going to try to break the bond," Harry said. "Tonight, alone, without telling me, which would have been painful and wouldn't have worked because the vinculum antiquum doesn't break by unilateral action. You said that yourself when you told me about the layers, the magic reads both participants." He sat up. "So either you weren't listening to your own explanation or you were hoping the first layer was thin enough to snap. Which is it?" The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Her jaw moved once. "Sit down," he said, less sharply. "Please." She sat, not in the chair, on the windowsill, which put her further from him and gave her the high ground and the exit angle simultaneously. He noted this without comment. Territory was territory and she'd ceded in her own time or not at all. "It activated faster than I expected," she said. "The resonance layer." "Yes." She looked at her own hands briefly. "I could feel your breathing change when you woke. That shouldn't be possible yet, that's a third-day symptom at the earliest." Her eyes came up. "Your magic is accelerating it." "My magic," Harry said carefully, "has always done things on its own schedule." "What are you?" she said. Not aggressive, the question had an almost academic quality, the tone of someone who has encountered a classification problem and finds it genuinely interesting despite everything else. "I've known powerful wizards. I've spent 3 years in the Dark Lord's inner circle. I've felt magic that would." She stopped. "Yours is different. It doesn't feel human." "I'm entirely human," Harry said. "I'm just, a particular kind of particular." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not. But it's what you're getting at 3 in the morning." He looked at her steadily. "You weren't just trying to break the bond. You were running." "What did you decide, while I was asleep?" She looked out the window. The village outside was absolutely still. "I decided that this situation is untenable," she said. "I am bound to a stranger from the future by magic I didn't invoke and can't control, in a situation that has political implications for my family, my position, and my service to." She stopped. "To Voldemort," Harry said plainly. Her head came around fast, eyes sharp. "You say that very easily." "He's a man," Harry said. "A dangerous one. An extraordinary one, actually, in several ways I'd rather not have to acknowledge. But a man. I don't say his name to be brave. I say it because the alternative is giving the word itself power it doesn't deserve." He paused. "What's your service to him worth to you, right now, honestly?" She stared at him. "I'm not asking you to defect," he said. "I'm asking what it's worth to you. Personally. Not ideologically, you can keep the ideology for now, We'll argue about it when we're not in a condemned pub in the middle of the night. I mean personally. What do you get from it that you couldn't get elsewhere? The question sat between them and she didn't answer immediately, which was itself an answer. People who were certain of their devotion didn't pause over questions like that. Power, she said finally. Recognition. A context in which what I am is an asset rather than a threat. And the cost? Everything has costs, she said sharply. Some costs are too high, Harry said. He said it simply, without flourish, and left it there. He wasn't going to argue the ideology tonight. He wasn't going to push. Bellatrix Black responded to pressure with equal and opposite force. She always had. It was one of the most consistent things about her, and the way to move her was to plant a question in good soil and leave it alone. She looked at him with that flat measuring gaze. You know things, she said. About what comes. About me specifically. Yes. And you're not going to tell me. Not yet. Not until I'm sure telling you will help rather than harm. And you get to decide that. Someone has to, Harry said, and I'm the one with the information. But if it helps, I'm not keeping it to wound you. I'm keeping it because knowing your own future is one of the most dangerous things that can happen to a person. It tends to either paralyze them or make them reckless, and you're neither of those things by nature. A pause. Something moved through her expression that wasn't quite gratitude and wasn't quite resentment, the specific complicated emotion of someone who has been seen accurately and isn't sure they want it to be. You're very certain of your own judgments, she said. I've had to be, he said. People who weren't kept dying. That landed. He hadn't meant it as a play for sympathy, it was simply the most honest compression of the last few years of his life, but he watched it hit her and settle, and something in her face lost a very specific edge. Not softened. Recalibrated. The bond, Harry said, steering back to practical ground. Second layer is already active. What does that mean for today? It means, she said, that we'll continue to be aware of each other's general emotional and intentional state. Not specific thoughts, nothing that granular. But the distinction between, say, fear and aggression will be clear. Deception will be harder. She paused. For both of us. Can you feel what I'm feeling right now? She studied him. Tired, she said. Alert. Something that's probably patience but could be calculation. And, she paused. Something I don't have a word for. Not the emotions I'd expect from someone in your situation. What would you expect? Fear. Disorientation. Desperation. She looked at him. You have none of those. Lost them a while back, Harry said. What else? Curiosity, she said slowly. About me, specifically. Genuine curiosity, not strategic assessment. Harry didn't deny it. You're interesting, he said. You always were. Just, not usually in circumstances where I could act on it. The look she gave him at that had layers he chose not to pick apart at 3 a.m. And what can you feel from me, she asked, with the deliberate flatness of someone controlling their voice very carefully. Harry considered. The compass pull of her was constant and directional, and he was already learning to separate the bond's signal from his own instincts, because they were different in texture. His own thoughts had the quality of his own voice, and the bond's information was more like weather, ambient and felt rather than formed. Anger, he said. Old anger, not at me specifically, though there's some of that too. Fear that's been thoroughly converted into something more useful. And, underneath both of those, something that's probably intelligence that hasn't had enough to actually engage with in a long time. She was very still. That's precise, she said. You're not as hard to read as you think, he said. When someone's reading the right signals. And what signals are those? The ones you're actually broadcasting, Harry said, versus the ones you want people to see. Another long silence. Outside a bird started somewhere, then stopped, confused about the hour. "We can't stay here," she said finally, practical again. "The men Rodolphus sent will report back. He'll know where I was last seen and he'll extrapolate. This village isn't far enough." "Where then?" Harry said. "I need access to money and resources. I have a vault, not the main Lestrange vault, a personal one, Gringotts. I can access it without anyone knowing, the key is warded to my magical signature, but I'd have to go to Diagon Alley and that's," she paused. "Visible," Harry said. "During a war, on a day after you went dark, walking into Gringotts is a red flag to both sides." "Yes. There's another option," Harry said. She waited. "Grimmauld Place," he said. The silence that followed was a different quality from the others. Heavier. 12 Grimmauld Place, Harry said carefully. "It's the Black family ancestral home. It's yours by blood right. And unless something has changed from what I know about this period, it's empty," she said quietly. "Has been for years. My aunt," she stopped. "Walburga is there. She doesn't leave. Is that a problem?" Bellatrix laughed, short and sharp and genuinely surprised out of her. "Walburga Black is always a problem," she said. "But she's family, and the house is black blood warded, which means Rodolphus's people can't get in unless invited, and the order won't look there because they think it's been abandoned since Sirius." She stopped very abruptly. Harry let the stopped sentence lie. She'd been about to say something about Sirius, about whatever estrangement had happened. He knew the broad strokes. Sirius burned off the family tapestry, disowned Walburga's fury, and she'd caught herself. He didn't push it. "Grimmauld Place," he said. "Can you get us there?" "I know it well enough to apparate to the front step," she said, with a careful neutrality that meant she hadn't been there recently and the reasons for that were tangled and uncomfortable. "But Walburga, I'll handle Walburga," Harry said. Bellatrix looked at him with something caught between amusement and warning. "You don't know Walburga Black." "No," Harry agreed. "But I have a significant advantage over most people who've tried to manage her." "Which is?" "I don't care if she likes me," Harry said. "I just need her to cooperate. Those are two very different problems." Bellatrix studied him for a long moment and then uncurled from the windowsill with the smooth efficiency of someone whose body was always ready to move. "Change out of those robes," she said. "You look like you just crawled out of a battle." "I just crawled out of a battle." "Yes, and in 1979 that's going to attract exactly the wrong kind of attention." She reached into her traveling bag and produced a set of plain dark robes, folded, and held them out. "Those are from a previous operation. They'll fit well enough." Harry took them without comment. She stepped out into the narrow corridor while he changed, and he did it quickly, rolling his battle robes and tucking them under the chair for later. The new ones were plain and dark and slightly large across the shoulders, but acceptable. When he opened the door she was already at the top of the stairs, cloak fastened. "Ready?" she said. "Yes." She held out her hand, wrist, actually, the same grip she'd used in the forest, functional rather than offered, and he took it, and they apparat. Grimmauld Place was exactly as Harry remembered it and completely unlike how he remembered it simultaneously. The physical structure was the same, that row of Georgian terraces in the grimy North London square, the houses that shuffled aside to reveal number 12 with its peeling black door and iron serpent knocker, the steps worn smooth by generations of black feet. But it was 1979, and the house had not yet had 2 decades more of entropy and abandonment. The windows were dark but intact. The stonework was shabby but not crumbling. There were lights on, somewhere deep in the house, a faint warm glow behind curtains on the first floor. Walburga Black was home. Bellatrix stood at the foot of the steps and looked up at the house with an expression that was doing a great deal of controlled and invisible work, and Harry, connected now to her by the bond's second layer, felt the shape of what was under that expression without the details, something old and unresolved and grief-adjacent, which surprised him because he hadn't expected grief. He didn't say anything about it. He walked up the steps and used the knocker. The sound it made was like a judgment. Nothing happened for 2 minutes. Then there was a shuffling sound inside, and a voice, muffled through the door, said something imperious that Harry's ears caught as probably, "Who is it?" though the precise syllables were shaped by an accent and a register that suggested the question was less inquiry and more warning. "My name is Harry Potter," Harry said to the door. "The House of Black Blood Law names me as a claimant. I'm invoking the right of threshold." He'd worked this out on the apparition, which took approximately 3 seconds of transit but had, in his internal processing, felt considerably longer. The vinculum antiquum gave him standing. Blood law gave him the right of threshold, the ancient magical right of a bonded party to enter the family seat. He was either correct about this or he was about to be hexed through a very solid Georgian door. A silence from inside the house. Then the sound of bolts withdrawing, not mechanical, magical, each one releasing with the specific tone of old wards being satisfied rather than overridden. The door opened. Walburga Black was shorter than Harry had expected, which was perhaps because her portrait was usually shrieking and shrieking seemed like it should come from height. She was in her 60s, with the high-boned architecture of the Black family face, the same structure visible in Sirius, in Bellatrix, in Regulus, and eyes that were the very specific dark gray that the family ran to, sharp and flat simultaneously. She was wearing a black dressing gown of extreme quality and she had a wand in her right hand and an expression on her face that managed to convey both, "I have been woken at an unconscionable hour," and "I will end you if you give me a reason," without any apparent effort. Her eyes went over Harry. Then to Bellatrix, standing behind him on the steps. "Bellatrix," she said. Her voice had the quality of something that had once been affectionate and then had a great deal of other things layered on top of it. "Aunt Walburga," Bellatrix said, and her voice was perfectly composed and said nothing at all. Walburga's eyes came back to Harry. "You invoked the right of threshold," she said. "That requires the vinculum antiquum." "Yes." "You saved a member of this house from mortal danger and the blood magic activated." "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. "Come in," she said. Not warmly. But not unwillingly either. There was something almost like satisfaction in her expression, the look of a woman who has been waiting for a very specific type of event and has seen it arrive, if not in the form she anticipated. They went in. The house smelled of old wood and something floral underneath, not a light perfume, something heavier, more like dried flowers and preserved things. The entrance hall was dark and the portrait on the wall, a painted Walburga, even more imperious in oils than in person, was mercifully silent and covered by its curtain. Creature appeared at the end of the hall, enormous eyes blinking in the candlelight, and made a noise that could have been either greeting or complaint and was probably both. Walburga said to Creature, and then to Harry, "Sit room." Second door. The sitting room was formal and cold and full of the specific atmosphere of a house that has been mostly shut up but maintained by habit rather than love. Good furniture, aggressively tasteful, every piece the kind of thing that cost tremendous amounts of money and looked it without trying to. Walburga sat in a chair by the fire, which lit itself as they entered, responding to the house's recognition of Bellatrix's blood, and looked at Harry with the sustained, frank assessment of someone who is accustomed to making definitive judgments and taking responsibility for them. Bellatrix sat. Harry sat. Creature appeared with tea and vanished. "Tell me what happened," Walburga said. Harry told her, cleanly and without embellishment. The forest, the 3 Death Eaters, the bond activating. He omitted the part about being from the future, which he could add later when the immediate situation was stable. Walburga listened without interrupting, which he suspected was not her default mode and was therefore a form of respect. When he finished, she looked at Bellatrix. "You were ambushed by Lestrange's men." "Associates," Bellatrix said. "Don't," Walburga said, with a precision that suggested this was an old argument wearing new clothes. "Rodolphius has been," she stopped, looked at Harry, looked back at Bellatrix. A decision was made behind her eyes. We will discuss Rodolphus separately. There's nothing to discuss, Bellatrix said. The betrothal contract has a provision for magical conflict of claim, Walburga said crisply. Which is exactly what the vinculum antiquum represents. If the blood law has activated and named this young man as a claimant, the betrothal contracts are in legal abeyance until a Wiesengemot review. She looked at Harry with something that had shifted from assessment into something more complex, the specific expression of an old-school pure-blood matriarch processing the possibility that something very unexpected has been placed before her and it might, under the circumstances, be acceptable. How powerful are you, Mr. Potter? Considerably, Harry said. The corner of her mouth moved. You say that very plainly. False modesty wastes time, Harry said. Her eyes sharpened with something that was very nearly approval. Indeed. And your family, old, Harry said. The Potters have been in Britain since at least the 12th century. Peveril line through the direct male descent, if that means anything to you. He watched her expression go very still in a way that said it meant quite a lot. I don't have the paperwork with me, but the magic is self-evident and the bond has already accepted me, so I think we can take the bloodline question as settled. Walburga was quiet for a moment. You're not what I expected, she said. Nobody ever is, Harry said, when they get past the first impression. She looked at him for a long moment and then looked at Bellatrix, and the look between them held something Harry couldn't read entirely, something that had been between them a long time, something that had been strained and was, in this moment, perhaps very slightly less strained than it had been before tonight. You'll stay here, Walburga said. It was not a question. Both of you. The house will recognize Mr. Potter by the bond and the blood law. I'll have Creature prepare rooms. She stood, with the unhurried authority of a woman who has never had cause to move quickly because things have always moved for her instead. In the morning we will discuss what this means and what steps are required. Tonight, she paused at the door. Tonight I am going back to bed. She looked at Harry one more time. You have the Peveril look about you, she said. Very faintly. But it's there. Then she was gone, and the room was quieter. Harry looked at Bellatrix. She was looking at the fire, and he could feel through the bond, faint and ambient, like warmth from a different room, something that was tired and unsettled, and beneath that, buried under several layers of discipline, something that might have been relief. The betrothal contract is in abeyance, he said. Don't read into that, she said, without looking at him. I'm not reading into anything. I'm stating a fact. It's a legal technicality. It doesn't change, it changes Rodolphus's claim on you under magical law, Harry said evenly. Which changes what options he has. Which changes what options you have. He paused. That's not me reading into anything. That's just what it is. She looked at him then, and the expression on her face was the most genuinely unguarded thing he'd seen from her yet, not soft, nothing so simple as that, but fractured at the edges, like a surface that has been under pressure for a very long time and has just felt something ease. You're doing this very deliberately, she said. Doing what? This. A gesture that encompassed the room, the house, the conversation. You're not pushing. You're not demanding. You're just placing things accurately. And then leaving them. Is it working? Harry asked. Her eyes narrowed. That depends on what you're trying to achieve. Right now? Harry said. A night's sleep and a conversation in the morning where we're both more honest than either of us has been yet. He stood. I'll take whatever room Creature puts me in. Come get me if anything happens. I'm not your sentry. No, he said, but you'll know if something goes wrong before I do, the bond will carry it. So. Come get me. He said it without the inflection of a command, without the inflection of a request. Just a practical arrangement between two people who were, whether either of them liked it or not, now in this together. He found Creature hovering in the corridor with an expression of profound displeasure and followed the elf up 2 flights of stairs to a room at the back of the house, clean, if spare, with a bed that had been made up with the crisp efficiency of old magical housekeeping. He sat on the edge of the bed and held his wand in both hands and let himself, finally, in private, feel the full weight of where and when he was. Voldemort at the height of his power. James and Lily alive. Sirius free, just. Peter Pettigrew still a secret. The Longbottoms intact. Everyone he'd lost still in the world, alive and unaware of what was coming. The specific ache of that was something he'd been holding at arm's length all evening because if he let it in it would stop him functioning, and he couldn't afford to stop functioning. He thought about his parents. About Sirius. He thought about the fact that Sirius Black was alive in this time and was probably, 20 years old? 21? Living his best life, unaware that his cousin was in the family house and that someone from his son's future was sleeping in the back bedroom. He thought about Voldemort. About what he knew, and what he could use, and what the cost of using it would be. He was not here to relive a war. He was here, or he was choosing to be here, since choice was the only thing he could control, to change one. Not by being careful. Not by hiding, or playing roles, or operating through proxies. He'd tried the careful approach once. It had cost him everything he loved. He was going to try something different this time. He lay back on the bed, stared at the ceiling, and thought about Bellatrix Black 3 floors below him, sitting in front of a fire and doing whatever Bellatrix Black did when she was deciding whether to trust something. In his chest the bond pulsed steadily, and he thought about what she'd said, someone who knows exactly how dangerous everything is, and has stopped being afraid of it, and thought that she was right, and that she understood what that cost better than most, because he could feel that she'd paid a version of the same cost herself. He fell asleep thinking about how to win a war without becoming what he'd been fighting. He woke to shouting. Not in the house, the bond would have pulled him vertical for that. Outside, in the street, male voices carrying the specific pitched quality of a search pattern. Harry was on his feet and at the window in 3 seconds. The square was dark but not empty, 2 figures moving between the parked cars in the Muggle Street, moving with the systematic coverage of a professional sweep. Both wearing plain dark robes with nothing identifying. No masks. Not Aurors. Aurors moved in 3 at minimum and announced themselves. He was out of the room before he'd decided to move, taking the stairs 2 at a time in his socks, and met Bellatrix at the first floor landing with her wand in her hand and her hair loose and an expression of grim unsurprised anger on her face. Rodolphus moved faster than expected, she said quietly. Can they get in? Harry said. Not through the wards. The blood protections on this house are, she stopped. Strong. But if they have a specialist ward breaker, I'll deal with it, Harry said. They're Rodolphus's men. I'll deal with it, Harry said again, already moving toward the front door. Potter. Her voice, quiet, stopping him at the foot of the stairs. He looked back. The bond told him something, not words, not images, just a quality of the emotion in her, something taut and worried and directed at him, specifically. Not for herself. Be careful, she said, and it came out with the tone of someone who would prefer not to have said it and is not going to say it again. Always, Harry said. He pulled the door open and stepped out onto the front step. The 2 figures in the street looked up. They were perhaps 30 meters away, and in the dark Harry could see they were young, late 20s, both of them, and trying to look professional and not quite managing it, in the way of men who'd been told to do something serious and were hoping the serious didn't actually materialize. Harry stood on the step and looked at them. Go home, he said. Conversationally. Clearly. Not loudly, the Muggles were asleep and there was no need. The closer one raised his wand. Harry watched him do it with the mild attention of someone watching a child pick up something sharp. Who are you? The man said. I'm the reason Rodolphus Lestrange needs to change his plan, Harry said. I'm also the reason you're going to want to walk away from this particular errand. What happens next is up to you. Bellatrix is to be returned. Bellatrix Black, Harry said, is in this house as a guest of the Black family blood law, which supersedes Lestrange family claim in all provisions currently relevant. That's not my opinion. That's statutory magic law as written in the Wisengamot records since the 13th century. If you'd like to contest it, Rodolphus is welcome to file the appropriate motions. He paused. Or you could come through that ward line and find out what happens. The two men looked at each other. The closer one's wand hand moved. Harry's expulso hit the cobblestones between them, not at them, between them, with a crack and a bloom of blue-white light that lifted both men off their feet and deposited them 6 meters back, unhurt but sprawling, their wands scattered. He cast it without stress or ceremony, the way you'd swat something away from the dining table. He stood on the step while they scrambled up. The closer one looked at Harry with an expression that had moved from professional determination through shock and settled on something wise and retreating. They both picked up their wands and walked, quickly, not running, because running would admit too much, away down the street and into the dark. Harry watched until they turned the corner. Then he went back inside. Bellatrix was in the entrance hall. She'd watched through the window, he could see her standing at the edge of the curtain, and she'd stepped back when he turned. He closed the door behind him, reset the locks, added 2 of his own wards on top of the existing ones because the Black family protections were old but his were current and could run in parallel. 2 of them, he said. They're gone. You didn't hurt them, she said. Not question, not accusation. Something between observation and surprise. Didn't need to, Harry said. Hurt people get angry and come back with more people. Scared people go to their boss and say the target is defended. Rodolphus learns there's an obstacle. He thinks before his next move. Harry looked at her. Which gives us time. She was looking at him with that layered expression again, the one she kept revising as the night went on. You think several moves ahead. I've had to, he said, for the second time that night, and the repetition had a weight to it that settled between them without being addressed. Creature should know to report any approach to the ward line, Bellatrix said, steering into practical territory, which he was beginning to understand was what she did when something had made an impression she wasn't ready to examine. I'll reinforce the perimeter wards tomorrow with the Black family anchor spells. There are 3 of them I can perform without the senior family head. Walburga will need to co-sign 2 of them. Do that in the morning, Harry said. What time does Walburga wake? 7, precisely. She's very particular. Then at 7, Harry said. He looked up the stairs and then at her. You should sleep. So should you. I slept, he said. Enough. Go on. She didn't move immediately. She was standing in the dim entrance hall with the dark curtain of her hair around her face and the bond between them doing its ambient work. He felt her, faintly, the tired and the unresolved and the thing underneath that was beginning, very slowly, to look more like curiosity than hostility. She felt him, he knew. He wondered what she was getting. The 3rd layer, she said. You know what I said. About what it requires. Genuine mutual regard, Harry said. Yes. I need you to understand that I am not, she stopped. Tried a different construction. Whatever the bond is doing, I'm not, I don't simply, I know, Harry said. I'm not expecting anything. I'm not that optimistic or that stupid. She looked at him for a moment. You're neither of those things, she said slowly, are you? Good night, Bellatrix, Harry said. She went up the stairs, and Harry stood in the entrance hall and listened to the old house settle around him, the creak of joints, the tick of old pipes, the particular breathing of a building that has held generations of one family and knows their weight. In his chest the bond was steady and warm and getting more articulate by the hour, and somewhere 3 floors up he could feel her lying down, and the specific quality of someone who is going to be awake for a long time thinking before they sleep. He thought about the war. About what came next. About all the pieces on the board and how they sat and what order to move them in. Then he set a ward on the front door that would wake him if anything touched it, went back to his room, and went to sleep. And outside, in the grey pre-dawn London dark, somewhere across the city, a dark mark on the arm of the man who wore it burned with a sudden sharp inquiry. One of his most loyal instruments had gone quiet, and the Dark Lord noticed all his instruments, always, with the precise attention of a craftsman who has made a tool and refuses to lose track of it. Somewhere in an elegant house not 3 miles away, Lord Voldemort sat in a high-backed chair and looked at the fire and thought, with the particular cold patience that was his most dangerous quality, that he would need to know what had happened to Bellatrix Black. And he would find out. He always did. Chapter 3, The House of Black. The house woke at 7 with the mechanical precision of Walburga Black's personal schedule, which turned out to mean that the heating charms activated at 6:55, Creature began making sounds in the kitchen at 6:58, and at 7 on the dot a gong somewhere in the depths of the building produced a single resonant note that Harry felt more than heard. He was already awake. He'd been awake since 5, sitting on the floor of his room with his back against the bed frame, running through everything he knew about the First Wizarding War with the methodical thoroughness of someone doing inventory before a long journey. Names, dates, events, casualties, the bones of history as he understood it from Dumbledore's memories and the Order's records and Sirius's fragmented accounts. He was building a map of the present in his head, marking what was still intact and what had already shifted the moment he landed in that Wiltshire forest. The biggest shift was obvious and sleeping 3 floors up. Bellatrix Black's absence from the Death Eater ranks, even a temporary, unexplained absence, would register. She was not decorative to Voldemort's operation. She was operational. She ran missions, recruited, coordinated, and most importantly she was the visible proof to every other Death Eater that absolute loyalty was rewarded with absolute trust. Her going silent would be felt the way a general feels when one of his battalions stops reporting. Voldemort would move on it within days. Maybe less. Harry thought about that and decided what to do about it, and by the time the gong sounded he had the rough shape of a plan and the specific piece he needed to make it work. He put on the plain dark robes, ran a hand through his hair, achieving precisely nothing, as usual, and went downstairs. The kitchen was in the basement, exactly where he remembered it, and it was warm and smelled of toast and something that might have been porridge. Creature had laid the table for 3 with the kind of pointed correctness that suggested the elf had opinions about the number of people currently in the house and was expressing them through formal table settings. Walburga was already seated at the head of the table with a cup of tea and the Daily Prophet, which she was reading with the expression of someone who disapproves of events but considers it their duty to be informed about them. She looked up when Harry walked in. "Mr. Potter," she said. "Sit down. Creature will bring tea." Harry sat. Creature appeared at his elbow with a cup and then vanished with the compressed urgency of an elf who has several things to do and insufficient appreciation for doing them. "Did something occur outside last night?" Walburga said. "I heard a crack. 2 of Rodolphus Lestrange's people tried the ward line," Harry said. "I discouraged them." Walburga set the Prophet down. "Discouraged. They left. Unhurt but informed." He took the tea. "We should reinforce the perimeter wards today. Bellatrix knows the Black family anchor spells and she said you'd need to co-sign 2 of them." Something moved through Walburga's expression at the mention of Bellatrix's name in connection with the anchor spells, the family magic that required family cooperation, that required the kind of working together the Blacks had not, Harry understood, been doing much of lately. "She told you about those?" "She told me enough," Harry said. "The situation is going to escalate. Rodolphus knows where she is by now, or will shortly. We have maybe a day before he moves formally. Rodolphus cannot move against blood law provision, Rodolphus doesn't have to move against the law. He has to move against the situation," Harry said. He'll go to Voldemort. Tell him Bellatrix has been, what's the word, compromised, or taken, or influenced. Frame it as a threat to the operation. Voldemort will want to verify that for himself, which means he'll reach through the mark. He met Walburga's eyes steadily. I need to know what happens when Voldemort calls her. What the mark does physically. Walburga was very still. The question sat between them, a specific kind of question, the kind that assumes a great deal of knowledge and therefore communicates a great deal about the asker. She was working out what he knew and how. Harry could see her doing it, and she was too intelligent to waste time on denial. The dark mark burns, she said carefully. And compels. It is not irresistible, with sufficient will, but it's designed to be, Harry said. It's a leash with the sensation of a summons. He built it that way. Walburga's face did something complex. You speak of the Dark Lord very plainly. He's a man who made himself into a monster, Harry said. That's worth understanding clearly, not obscuring with titles. What happens to Bellatrix specifically if he calls through the mark and she doesn't come? Pain, Walburga said. Prolonged and escalating. He has used it as punishment before. On others. She stopped. How do you know about the marks at this level of detail? I told you last night I came from the future, Harry said. He watched her absorb this. He'd told her, briefly, but she hadn't fully engaged with it yet, had been processing it at the edges while handling more immediate concerns. Now he let it land properly. I know a great deal about what Voldemort does and how he does it. I know what the war looks like from here and what it looks like at the end. I know who survives and who doesn't. The kitchen was very quiet. Creature was not in evidence. And Bellatrix, Walburga said. Her voice had a quality he hadn't heard from her before. Careful in a way that meant afraid, but Walburga Black would never call it that. She survives the war, Harry said. Which was true. What he chose not to add was the specific form that survival took. But what happens to her between now and then? He paused. That's what I'm here to change. Walburga looked at him for a long time. The morning light through the kitchen's high narrow windows caught the gray in her hair and the sharp architecture of a face that had once been, he could see it, genuinely striking, and was now the striking of a woman who has outlasted everything soft about herself. You came back through time to save my niece, she said. I came back through time because someone detonated something catastrophic at the wrong moment, Harry said. I saved your niece because she was in front of me and the alternative was watching her get taken. He paused. But I'm not unhappy about the sequence of events. Walburga considered this with the judicial attention it deserved. No, she said slowly. I imagine you're not. She picked up her tea. Bellatrix will be down shortly. We will discuss the ward reinforcement as a family matter. She said family with a specific deliberate weight, and Harry understood she was deciding something, some classification that had consequences he'd feel later. Good, Harry said. Footsteps on the stairs. Bellatrix came into the kitchen and the bond, which had been a quiet background hum since they'd both been asleep, sharpened immediately into something more present and directional, the way a radio signal improves when you reduce the distance. She was dressed in black, her hair pinned back with the controlled elegance she'd apparently decided was today's register, and she looked at Harry when she sat down with an expression that communicated several things at once, the foremost of which was I am awake, I have been thinking, and I have not decided anything yet. Good morning, Harry said. Is it, she said, reaching for the teapot. Relatively, he said. Lestrange sent people last night. I heard. She poured without looking at him. Two. They've gone. She looked at him then, quick and assessing, checking the detail of gone against whatever the bond had given her last night. He'd been careful and efficient and had come back without any signature of having been in a real fight, which he knew she'd register. She did. A small nod. The mark, Harry said, because the morning was not going to get less complicated by waiting. How often does he call? Her hand stopped on the teacup. That's not a subject, I need to know the current frequency and what happens to you physically when it activates, Harry said. Because if Rodolphus talks to him today, and he will, the first thing Voldemort does is pull you in. And I need to know what that looks like and how long we have. A silence. She looked at Walburga, some quick communication, old and familial, and then at Harry. Daily, at present, she said. Morning. An hour, sometimes 2. She held her left forearm slightly away from the table. The sleeve covered the mark but the gesture acknowledged it. When he calls, the skin heats. It escalates if I don't respond. I have perhaps 10 minutes of reasonable tolerance before it becomes, she chose the word precisely, distracting. What happens at the 10-minute mark without response? Significant pain, she said, for the next several hours. Intermittent. As a reminder. Harry looked at the forearm. He thought about what he knew about the dark mark, the magic that composed it, the way it worked, the specific genius and the specific horror of it. It was a masterwork of compulsion magic, ancient forms of binding combined with Voldemort's own extraordinary innovation. It was also, like almost everything Voldemort built, predicated on the assumption that the person wearing it had no recourse. I can block it, Harry said. Both women looked at him. Not permanently and not without your cooperation, he said to Bellatrix. But I can build a ward specifically keyed to your magical signature that intercepts the mark signal and muffles it. Long enough to buy time. Long enough that he can't use it to hurt you as a coercive tool. He paused. It's complicated magic and it'll take a few hours and I'd need full access to the mark itself, which means you deciding to let me near it. Bellatrix stared at him. No one can block the dark mark. It's a magical construct, Harry said. A complex and brilliant one, but it's not divine. It's not immutable. He built it and it can be interfered with. He met her eyes steadily. I know what it's built from. I know the layers. I know where the compulsion magic interfaces with the binding magic and where that junction is vulnerable to a precisely placed counterward. He paused. Do you want to know how I know that? You've dealt with them before, she said slowly. In the future. I've dealt with what they do to people, he said. For a long time. Another one of those silences that did a lot of work. She looked at the covered forearm. He could feel through the bond something that was not quite fear and not quite relief, a complicated middle state, the emotion of someone being offered something they want and not trusting the offer. After the ward reinforcement, she said finally. We deal with the house perimeter first. Agreed, Harry said. Creature produced breakfast with the air of someone completing an obligation under protest, and they ate, and the conversation moved to the practical, ward structures, the specific anchor spells Walburga would need to co-perform, the coverage gaps the existing protections had developed over years of minimal maintenance. Bellatrix and Walburga talked through the magic with the clipped fluency of two people who share a deep technical vocabulary and have not used it together in a long time. Harry listened and contributed and noted the way they moved around each other, wary, attentive, like two animals that have the same territory markings but different scent histories. Something had gone wrong between them, at some point, and they were both managing the wrongness with elaborate courtesy. He thought about Sirius. Thought about how that must sit in this house, the absent member, the disowned one, and how different Bellatrix and Walburga would each feel about that specific absence. He didn't bring it up. After breakfast they went to the back of the house, into the garden, small, walled, dead in November, and Harry watched while Bellatrix and Walburga worked the anchor spells together. It was proper old magic, the kind that needed two practitioners of the same bloodline and had a formal structure to it, call and response, wand movements that were almost ceremonial. Walburga led and Bellatrix answered, and the magic that came out of it was the deep blue-black of black family power at full expression, beautiful in the specific way of dangerous things, clean and cold and very old. Harry added his own wards in the gaps, layering them under and alongside the blood protections rather than over them, so the two systems worked in parallel and reinforced rather than competed. His magic over the existing structure felt different from Bellatrix's additions, warmer at the edges. His particular signature, which he'd been told by multiple people over the years had an unusual quality. He didn't think about it analytically. He just built the wards and they went where he put them. When it was done, the house sat behind a layered protection that Harry estimated would hold against anything short of Voldemort himself making a direct and sustained assault, and possibly even then for a meaningful amount of time. Walburga surveyed the finished work with the expression of a craftsman examining a finished piece. "Your additions are unconventional," she said to Harry. "But they integrate cleanly." "They're designed to," Harry said. She looked at him one more time with that measuring quality, and then went inside, and Harry understood the morning's first business was concluded. He and Bellatrix stood in the dead garden for a moment. The sky above the walls was winter white, cloud covering everything, and the air smelled of cold stone and London. "The mark," Harry said. She looked at her left forearm. "In here, or sitting room is fine," Harry said. "We'll need privacy and time." "An hour, probably." They went up to the sitting room, fire already lit, creature's work, and she sat in the chair by the window and pushed her left sleeve up without ceremony, in the manner of someone who has decided to do something and is not going to make it theatrical. The dark mark was exactly as Harry had seen it in other contexts, the skull and serpent in black-green, clean against pale skin, unambiguous in its ugliness. Not because of what it looked like but because of what it meant, what it had been put there to mean. A collar made to look like an honor. He knelt beside the chair and looked at it without touching, reading the magic visually first. The bond between them was active and close at this range, and he could feel the faint constant discomfort that the mark generated. She'd been living with it long enough to filter it out, but at this proximity he caught the edge of it, a persistent low-grade wrong note in the harmonic of her magic. Anger moved through him, quiet and clean, at the workmanship of something designed to cause that. "You can feel it," she said, watching his face. "Through the bond," he confirmed. "How long have you had it?" 18 months. 18 months of that low-grade constant discomfort, built in deliberately to reinforce dependency. He pressed it down and focused. "I'm going to read the magic structure first," he said. "I won't touch the mark itself until I tell you what I'm going to do. All right?" She looked at him. "All right," she said, and the word had a quality, careful and deliberate, that said she understood this as an unusual kind of trust. He held his wand over the mark without touching it and cast a deep diagnostic sequence, the kind Madame Pomfrey had used on him after significant magical trauma and the kind he'd adapted himself over years for field use. The information came back in layers and he sorted through it, the binding structure underneath, the compulsion mechanism on top, the signal relay that connected to the other marks and through them to the original caster. It was extraordinary work, he had to admit that. Complex, elegant in a cold way, deeply embedded in the skin's magical resonance rather than sitting on top of it. Removing it entirely would be the work of days and probably wouldn't be fully clean. But blocking the compulsion signal without damaging the underlying structure? That he could do. He talked her through it first, clearly and fully, what he was going to cast, what it would do, what it would feel like, what the limitations were. She listened with absolute attention, asking 3 sharp technical questions that told him she understood magical theory at an advanced level and wanted to understand the mechanism rather than just accept the result. He answered all 3 properly. Then he built the ward. It took 40 minutes. Close work, precise, the kind of casting that required sustained focus and a very steady wand hand and the willingness to stop and recalibrate when the magic's response told him he was off-center. He'd done similar work before, not on a dark mark specifically, but on cursed objects, dark binding constructs, the family curse on the gaunt ring, and the principles translated even if the specific application was new. Twice he felt the mark react against his work, the dark magic in it recognizing interference and pushing back, and twice he held his ground and pressed through it without rushing. She sat very still throughout. That particular stillness of someone managing pain or discomfort by refusing to let it show, not because she needed to hide it from him, he thought, but because stillness was the mode she'd always used, the discipline she'd built in, and it served her here regardless of audience. At one point the mark flared, the morning call, he realized. Voldemort's daily contact. He felt it through the bond, the sharp escalation of wrong note into active intrusion, and he held the ward work steady and let the unfinished structure absorb the signal, test it, and he adjusted on the fly based on what he learned from watching the compulsion magic attempt to complete its circuit. Bellatrix inhaled sharply. Once. Then controlled it. Almost through, Harry said quietly. The ward snapped into place with the specific sensation of a lock engaging, not loud, not dramatic, just a clean solid sense of completion. The signal cut. He felt it cut through the bond, felt the wrong note in her magic reduce from active intrusion to dull background static, and he sat back on his heels and looked at the mark. The ward sat over it like a second skin, invisible to the eye but clear to magical sense, his own magic, warm and stubborn, wrapped around the signal relay and damping it without cutting it entirely. Clean enough that it wouldn't register as obvious tampering from outside. Try to feel for it, he said. The call. Is it still there? She concentrated. He watched her face. Muffled, she said, slowly. I can feel it pressing but it doesn't have any compulsion force. It's like hearing a voice through a wall. I know it's there but it has no, she paused. No pull. Good, Harry said. It won't hold forever. The magic will adapt and find the edges of it, I'd say a week, maybe 10 days, before it starts breaking through again. But it'll do for now. She looked at the arm for a moment and then at him. He was still kneeling beside the chair at her level and the distance between them was the close working distance of the last 40 minutes and it suddenly registered as social distance rather than practical, and he stood. Thank you, she said. It came out with the quality of something that had required active effort, not because she didn't mean it, but because the mechanism for that kind of acknowledgement was one she didn't use often and it felt slightly ill-fitting, like a formal coat she'd outgrown. Part of the arrangement, Harry said. Is it, she said. Not a question, an examination of the claim. Yes, he said. We're bound. Your well-being is connected to mine by magic, among other things. A practical man keeps his investments healthy. She looked at him with the expression that he was beginning to catalogue as her I know what you're doing face, the slight tightening at the eyes, the quality of attention that said she'd heard the actual sentence and the one underneath it and was deciding which to respond to. A practical man, she repeated. Among other things, Harry said again, and moved to the other chair before the conversation could develop further in a direction neither of them was ready for. The afternoon belonged to Phineas Nigellus Black. Harry had been aware of the portrait since they arrived, a large canvas on the first-floor landing, depicting a severe-looking wizard in headmaster's robes, dark eyes sharp under a neat beard, who had been absent from the frame when Harry first passed it but had been very much present and observant every time since. Watching with the specific intent of a man who is gathering information before speaking. Harry let him watch until after lunch, and then went and stood in front of the portrait with his arms folded and looked at Phineas Nigellus Black, who looked back at him with the expression of a man who considers most people not worth his time and is currently revising that judgment upward under protest. You've been reading me all morning, Harry said. I've been observing the situation, Phineas said. His voice was dry and precise, the diction of a Victorian education. There's a distinction. Is there? Harry said. Observation is neutral. Reading implies interpretation. A pause. Though I have been doing that as well. The painted eyes moved over Harry with the deep assessment of someone who was, in life, a Slytherin headmaster of Hogwarts and had therefore made a professional study of people. You're not surprised by the bond. I wasn't delighted by it, Harry said, but no, not surprised. Magic does what magic does. And you're not frightened by this house. I know this house, Harry said, and stopped before the wrong tense could get him in trouble. The Black family is not a mystery to me. Phineas was quiet for a moment. You said your line was Potter through Peveril. Yes. There is a connection there, Phineas said slowly, to the Blacks. Not documented. Not widely known. The families crossed twice in the 17th century, both times through second and third children who didn't carry the family name. The magical bloodline has a trace of shared ancestry. His eyes sharpened. Which may be why the blood magic accepted you. The vinculum antiquum is not strictly a family-only provision, it activates for family-adjacent magical signatures under the right circumstances. Your Peveril ancestry might have been precisely calibrated enough to trigger the full bond rather than a lesser version. Harry absorbed this. It was more than he'd known and it mattered, it meant the bond wasn't arbitrary or random. It had gone looking for something in him and found it. Tell me about the vinculum antiquum, Harry said. All of it. Whatever the portraits know that the current family doesn't. Phineas leaned forward in his frame. The expression on the painted face was the closest thing to genuine pleasure Harry had seen from him, the pleasure of a man with knowledge who has found someone worth giving it to. The Blacks have had it invoked 4 times in recorded family history, he said. The first in 1304. The second in 1551. The third in 1743. Each time the bond activated, it fundamentally altered the trajectory of the house. How? The house absorbs the bonded party, Phineas said. Not literally. Not by force. But the blood magic recognizes the bond as an investment. The family's power and the bonded individual's power grow in tandem. What happens to one echoes in the other. He paused. The third layer, the permanent stage, was reached in 2 of the 4 historical activations. What happened to those partnerships? The first, 1304, Elara Black and a wizard named Corvinus, they led the house for 50 years and were, by all accounts, formidable. The second, 1743, Hesper Black and a woman named Margold Flint, they fought the last great pure-blood war of the 18th century and won it. Another pause. Neither partnership was easy. Both involved 2 people of extraordinary and somewhat incompatible characters who spent a great deal of time arguing and an apparently equivalent time being unstoppable. That sounds familiar, Harry said. Phineas looked at him. Something very nearly a smile. I imagine it does. He settled back in the frame. The bond is not sentimental, Mr. Potter. It is ancient and it is practical. It chooses for power and for complementarity, 2 people whose magical and personal natures fit together in the way of lock and key. Not because they are alike. Because they are not. A pause. Bellatrix Black is one of the most formidable witches produced by this family in 2 centuries. That is not flattery. It is assessment. Her power and her intelligence are matched only by the extraordinary degree to which they have been misdirected. Yes, Harry said. And you, Phineas said, are something I don't have a category for. Which is not a condition I have often experienced. He studied Harry. You carry death in you. I've died, Harry said simply. It didn't stick. Phineas was silent for a moment. The Deathly Hallows, he said very quietly. Harry looked at him steadily and said nothing. The cloak, Phineas said. The Elder Wand. He stopped. His painted eyes went very still. All 3. 2, technically, Harry said. The stone is somewhere in the Forbidden Forest and that's where it can stay. The silence that followed was the most respectful silence Harry had received from Phineas Nigellus Black so far, which was saying something given the man's default setting. The portrait sat very still and looked at Harry with an expression that was working through several significant revisions. Then you are not simply a claimant by bond provision, Phineas said finally. No, Harry said. I'm not. The Master of Death, bound to the heir of House Black, Phineas said slowly, the words falling individually like stones in deep water. By the oldest magic the family possesses. He stopped. The Dark Lord will not be able to ignore that. He won't need to ignore it, Harry said. He's going to have to deal with it directly. You're going to make yourself known to him, Phineas said. Eventually, Harry said. When I decide it's the right moment and in the manner I choose. He looked at the portrait steadily. I'm done waiting to be found. Phineas looked at him for a long moment, with the full weight of a man who has seen centuries of this family's history and has the perspective that entails. The last time someone stood in this house and spoke with that quality of certainty, he said, it was Arcturus Black in 1939, preparing to defy 3 other great families simultaneously. How did that go? Harry asked. Badly for the 3 families, Phineas said. Harry nodded. Good precedent. He was halfway down the stairs when Phineas called after him. Mr. Potter. He stopped. The information I hold about this family's magic and history, I share it selectively, Phineas said. I have shared considerably with you this afternoon. I noticed, Harry said. I appreciate it. I share it, Phineas said, because I have watched this family diminish for 3 generations. Watched it break itself on ideology and pride and the specific stupidity of people who confuse tradition with wisdom. The painted voice was dry but something under it was not. If what you're suggesting is possible, a version of this house and this family that doesn't end in ruins, he stopped. Don't waste what I've given you. I won't, Harry said. He found Bellatrix in the library. Of course she was in the library. It was the largest room in the house and it was full of the kind of books that nowhere else would have, volumes of magic that would be considered dangerous in any other context, and she'd apparently spent the afternoon pulling them off shelves and reading with the single-minded appetite of someone who has had a very strange 48 hours and is coping with it through research. 4 books were open on the table around her and she was in the middle of a 5th, making notes in a small cramped hand on a piece of paper that had several crossed-out lines on it. Harry sat down across from her and she didn't look up. Phineas talked, she said. A great deal, Harry confirmed. Do you know the historical activations? I found 2 of them, she said, still reading. 1304 and 1743. The 1551 one isn't documented in these volumes. She turned a page. Elara Black's account of the early Bond resonance matches what I've been feeling. The directionality, the emotional register. She paused. She describes it as, like developing a new sense. Annoying at first because you don't know how to filter the new information. Does it get less annoying? Harry said. She says it becomes useful. She finally looked up, and her eyes had the bright focused quality of someone who has been doing good intellectual work. She also says, and this is the part that's going to be relevant, that the bond's second layer accelerates under conditions of shared danger and shared magic. The ward reinforcement we did this morning, the mark work this afternoon, sped it up, Harry said. Significantly. She closed the book. At this rate, the 3rd layer will become available within days rather than weeks. She held his gaze. I want you to understand what that means. What it requires. What it will mean for both of us if it happens. Permanent magical awareness, Harry said. Emotional resonance for life. No more being strangers. More than that, she said. Phineas told you the historical examples. Look at what those partnerships actually were. Not comfortable coexistence. Not a practical arrangement. The magic chose them because they were, she stopped, looking for a word. Matched. Fundamentally. In the way that produces either extraordinary collaboration or extraordinary conflict or, in most cases, both at once. And you're concerned about which we'd produce. I'm concerned, she said carefully, about making a permanent magical commitment to someone I've known for 36 hours. That's reasonable, Harry said. But the bond decides, not us. We can't choose to activate or not activate the third layer any more than we chose the first two. The question isn't whether it happens. The question is what we do with it when it does. She looked at him. You're very calm about this. I've learned, Harry said, that there are about 4 categories of problems. Problems I can solve. Problems I can influence. Problems I can prepare for. And problems that are going to happen regardless, and I should spend my energy on positioning rather than resistance. He spread his hands slightly. This is the 4th category. The acceptance of the inevitable, she said, and the tone had a dry quality that was the closest she'd come to humor since they'd met. Strategic acceptance, Harry said. Different thing. She looked at him for a moment, and then something eased in her face, not dramatically, not all at once, but the way a morning eases into full daylight, gradually and then completely. The bond information aside, she said. The Mark Ward aside. You and I still have a fundamental problem. Voldemort, Harry said. I have been in his service for 3 years, she said. I have done things in that service that cannot be undone or, she stopped. I am not asking you to overlook them. I'm stating a fact about my history. I know your history, Harry said quietly. Most of it. And you still, she stopped again. I still what? Harry said. She looked at him with the expression she'd had in the early hours of the morning, the fractured one, the look of someone who has been seen accurately and is not sure what to do with that. You don't treat me like what I am, she said. What I've been. I treat you like what you are, Harry said. Which is not the same as what you've done. He held her eyes. You are extraordinarily capable, intellectually brilliant, magically powerful, and you have spent those qualities in service of something that has been slowly destroying you from the inside while telling you it was elevating you. He paused. I'm not overlooking your history. I'm looking past it to what's still there underneath. The silence that followed was the longest since they'd met. The library was warm and dark around them, books breathing on their shelves, the fire doing its quiet work. The bond between them was fully active and open, and he felt the shape of what she was managing, something vast and complex, something that had been building pressure since the forest and was now encountering, for the first time, an opening. Not a resolution. Just a door. Why me, she said quietly. Not why did you save me, not why the bond, those were asked and answered. Something more specific. Why does someone from the future know my history well enough to look past it? Because, Harry said, in the future I came from, you were the clearest example I ever saw of what this war does to people who could have been something extraordinary. What it takes and what it makes instead. He held her gaze. I spent a long time after the war trying not to think about that. And then I started thinking about it and couldn't stop. And when I came through that time tier in the middle of a Wiltshire forest and found you in front of me, my first thought wasn't strategy or politics or the timeline. What was it? She said, almost inaudible. It was not again, Harry said. Not this time. The fire shifted. A log settled. Creature made a distant sound somewhere in the depths of the house. Bellatrix Black looked at Harry Potter across a table of open books about ancient magic and said nothing, and the silence was not empty. It was full of things that had no words yet and didn't need them yet, which was perhaps the right place for them. We have perhaps a day, she said finally, returning to practical ground with the care of someone finding solid footing in new terrain. Before Rodolphius forces Voldemort's hand. Before the Mark call goes unanswered enough to warrant escalation. Yes, Harry said. We need a cover story. Something that explains my absence and my silence without, no cover story, Harry said. She stared at him. Cover stories require maintenance, Harry said. They have gaps. They require other people to corroborate, and those people become vulnerabilities. I'm done with cover stories. He leaned forward. We tell the truth. Or the version of the truth that's strategically necessary. You are bound by the vinculum antiquum to a wizard of significant power and ancient lineage who invoked the Black family blood law. That is the truth. The law is on our side. Let Voldemort deal with that. You want to tell the Dark Lord, I want to make it publicly, magically, and legally impossible for Voldemort to simply call you home and have everything go back to normal, Harry said. The blood law is his problem, not ours. He can't override it without undermining his own credibility with half the pure blood families who support him. He hates it, but he respects structural power when he has to. A pause. He'll want to meet me. Meeting the Dark Lord is not, I know what it is, Harry said calmly. I want to meet him. On my terms, not his. The look she gave him had the quality of someone who has been told that someone is not afraid of anything and has just found concrete evidence that this is not performative. You're serious, she said. Completely, Harry said. She stared at him for another moment. Then she breathed out through her nose and said, You are either the most dangerous man I've ever met or the most foolish. Which do you think? Harry said. She held his gaze, and the bond between them was warm and clear, and the look in her eyes was not the fury of the forest or the hostility of the dark bedroom or the calculated assessment of a woman protecting herself. It was something else. The beginning of something else. I think, she said slowly, that whatever comes, it is going to be extraordinary. Harry let that sit between them for a moment. Come on, he said, standing. We should eat something and then plan tomorrow properly. The day after is going to be complicated. She stood, closed the books with practiced care. You said the day after is when Voldemort acts. Yes, Harry said. And I want to be ready. Ready meaning I've slept, I've eaten, I know the ground, and I've decided exactly what I'm going to say to the most dangerous dark wizard in a century, Harry said. Which means tonight I need to think and tomorrow morning I need to talk to you about what you know about him. The real things. The things his Death Eaters know that nobody else does. She was quiet for a moment, standing by the table in the warm dark library. You're asking me to tell you everything I know about the Dark Lord. Yes, Harry said. Another pause. He let it breathe. Ask me properly, then, she said. Harry looked at her. Bellatrix, he said. Will you tell me everything you know about Voldemort? His habits, his patterns, his vulnerabilities, the things that move him and the things that don't. Everything. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Yes, she said. I will. They went down to dinner, and in the hallway the portrait of Phineas Nigellus Black watched them go with the expression of a man watching something very old and very powerful set itself into motion, and he said nothing, and the house itself seemed to settle slightly around them, the old walls registering the new weight of what was being built within them, not yet visible, not yet complete, but there, and growing, and permanent in the way that only the oldest magic is permanent. Outside, London moved in its ordinary dark, entirely unaware. And somewhere across the city, in an elegant house not 3 miles away, the Dark Lord Voldemort looked at the fire and felt the muffled absence of his best weapon with the cold precision of a craftsman who has just been informed that something he made has been interfered with. His red eyes were very still. His patience was absolute. He would move tomorrow. Chapter 4, The Known and the Unknowing. The morning came in cold and fast with a sky the color of old pewter, and Harry was in the kitchen at 6 with a cup of tea and Bellatrix's voice in his memory running through everything she'd told him about Voldemort the night before. She'd talked for 3 hours. Not reluctantly, once she'd committed to it she'd committed fully, with the focused precision of someone who understands that information given halfway is information given uselessly. She told him about Voldemort's rhythms, his preferences, the specific way he ran his inner circle, the hierarchy of trust, the performance of devotion he required, the particular cruelties he used not out of rage but out of architectural intent, each one designed to produce a specific effect in a specific person. She told him about the way he moved in a room, how he used silence, how he watched people's magic the way other people watched their faces. Harry had listened and asked questions and built a picture that overlaid on everything he already knew from the future, and what came out of the overlay was something more complete and more dangerous than either version alone. Voldemort in 1979 was not yet the thing he'd become after the night in Godric's Hollow. He was whole. He was at the height of his considerable powers, in full possession of a body and a mind that had not yet been fractured by the rebounding of a killing curse. He was, in Harry's careful estimation, more dangerous than the Voldemort he'd faced at the Battle of Hogwarts in several specific ways. He was more patient. And he was less afraid. The fear would come later, the deep existential terror of the Horcrux maker who has split his soul too many times and started to feel the cost of it. That fear had made him reactive in the future, had made him occasionally rash. The 1979 Voldemort was operating without that weight, which meant he was operating with full strategic clarity and no psychological soft spots. No soft spots except the ones he'd always had. Harry ran through those carefully and drank his tea. Bellatrix came down at 6:30, earlier than yesterday, which the bond had given him a vague foreknowledge of, a slight directional shift in her wakefulness that he was beginning to read the way you read weather. She sat down, accepted the tea he'd already poured, and looked at him with the expression of someone who has slept on a significant decision and woken up having made it. "I need to tell you something I didn't say last night," she said. "All right," Harry said. "The mission in the forest," she said. "The one that went wrong. It wasn't an assassination or a raid. I was retrieving information." She held his gaze. "There is a project the Dark Lord has been running for 2 years that only 3 people in his inner circle know the full shape of. I am one of the 3. Harry waited. "He's been locating objects," she said. "Specific objects. Very old, very powerful. He began collecting them years before the first Death Eater was marked. The collection is," she paused. "The word he uses is insurance. The Horcruxes." She was talking about the Horcruxes, or approaching them. She didn't know the full truth of what they were, couldn't know unless Voldemort had told her, but she knew about the objects and she knew they were significant. Harry looked at her steadily and did not react. "What kind of objects?" he said, because she knew more than she'd said and he needed to know how much. "Old artifacts with enormous stored magical potential," she said slowly. "He keeps them hidden. Hidden so thoroughly that even the people who hid them don't know all the locations." She met his eyes. "He gave me one to hide. Told me to hide it somewhere no one could access without knowing specific conditions. I chose," she stopped. "A place I won't name yet. Because you're going to want to go there and I need to think carefully about whether letting you find it is wise." "It's not wise," Harry said. "It's necessary. But I understand the distinction and I'm not going to push you tonight." She looked at him. "You already know what they are," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "Yes," Harry said. "Then you know why." "I know why they matter," Harry said. "And I know what it cost people to destroy them. And I know," he stopped, chose precision. "I know that the one you're holding isn't going to go anywhere before we're ready to deal with it, and we have other things to do first." She was quiet for a moment, her hands around her cup. "What I gave him," she said. "What I helped him do. Not just the objects, the things I did in service of the project, the things I did to people who got close to the truth, Bellatrix," Harry said. She looked at him. "I know," he said, simply. "All of it, or most of it. And I'm sitting here drinking tea with you at 6:30 in the morning and I made you a cup before you came down. I know what that is." The silence stretched. He felt through the bond the shape of what she was managing, something raw and complicated, not guilt exactly, not the word she'd use, but something that sat in the same place guilt sits, and she was looking at him across it the way people look across distances they're not sure they can close. "Later," he said gently. "When the immediate war is handled, you and I are going to have very long and very honest conversations about all of it. But not this morning. This morning we need to get ahead of Voldemort and I need you focused. She breathed out. The rawness shuddered. The focus came back, clean and sharp. What's the plan? She said. First, we need to tell Walburga what's happening today, Harry said. She needs to know and she deserves to. Second, I want to get a message to someone before Voldemort makes his move. Who? Albus Dumbledore, Harry said. The look she gave him was extraordinary. You want to contact the head of the Order of the Phoenix while you are sitting in the ancestral home of one of the Dark Lord's most loyal former servants, Harry said. The bond changes your status under law. You know that. And Dumbledore, he paused. Dumbledore is the only person on either side of this war who is capable of understanding the full strategic picture. I need him to know I'm here before someone else tells him, because if Voldemort gets to him first with a version of events, the next Order raid on this house is going to be before we're ready. She stared at him. You're going to walk into this from both sides simultaneously. Yes, Harry said. That's insane. It's the only position that works long-term, Harry said. Hiding here and hoping the war resolves itself isn't a strategy. It's a delay. He looked at her steadily. We have information that could end this war in months rather than years. Voldemort's vulnerabilities, his objects, his patterns, all of it. But none of that is useful if we spend the next year ducking both sides. I need to be a player, not a refugee. She was quiet for a moment, turning the cup in her hands. And where does that leave me? She said. In this plan where you're a player. Where do I fit? Harry looked at her. Exactly where the bond puts you, he said. Next to me. Which is a different thing from behind me or in front of me. The words landed. He watched them land. She held his gaze for 3 seconds, then 4, then looked away at the window with the careful deliberateness of someone managing something they don't quite know how to hold yet. Write your message, she said. I'll speak to Walburga. He wrote to Dumbledore in the library, longhand on black family notepaper, which felt either appropriate or ironic depending on how you looked at it. He kept it short and specific. He was in London, he had information of critical strategic importance, he was aware of the sensitivity of the channel and had taken precautions, and he needed a meeting within 24 hours at a location of Dumbledore's choosing. He signed it with his full name and added a single line that he knew would get Dumbledore's attention. I know about Nicholas Flamel. He sealed it and gave it to one of the house's owls, ancient, bad-tempered, black family post owls were apparently all alike, and sent it out. Then he went back upstairs and the day shifted sideways on him. The owl had been gone 20 minutes when the wards triggered. Not the perimeter wards, the inner detection layer, the one Harry had built to register magical signatures within the street. 2 signatures, approaching from the north. He felt them in the ward work the way you feel a vibration through a floor, and he stood up from the library table and went to the window. 2 figures on the pavement below. Not masked, not robed, that was the first marker. Ordinary clothes, winter coats, moving with the careful casualness of people who are trying not to look like what they are. They stopped on the pavement across from number 12, which they could presumably see because they were magical, and the shorter one, a man, red-haired, young, pointed at something on the front of the building. Harry knew that red hair. He went downstairs fast, arrived in the hall, and Bellatrix was already there coming from the direction of the sitting room with Walburga 2 steps behind her, both of them reading the ward alert off the air of the house. 2 wizards, Harry said. Order of the Phoenix. Don't ask how I know, but they're not a threat. He looked at Bellatrix. Stay in the back of the house. I'm not going to, stay in the back of the house, he said, because if they see you before I've established context, the conversation gets 10 times harder and we don't have the time. 20 minutes. Give me 20 minutes. She held his look and the bond between them was active and he could feel the specific quality of her resistance, not fear, not deference, something more like a professional's recognition that the tactical read was correct even when it was annoying. 20 minutes, she said. He looked at Walburga. Does anyone in the Order know this house is in use? No, Walburga said. They believe it's abandoned. Have believed so for years. Her expression had the set quality of someone who is aware that the next few minutes are significant. Sirius told them, presumably, that I don't receive visitors. Good, Harry said. Then they're here on intelligence from somewhere else, which means the message to Dumbledore moved faster than I expected. He turned to the door. Let me handle this. Please. He opened the front door before they knocked. The two figures on the step were, as he'd seen from the window, young, late teens to early 20s, both of them, and he knew them both, in the way he'd always known them, through stories and photographs and the specific grief of meeting people you've loved through other people's love of them. The taller one had dark hair, glasses, walked with the easy confidence of someone who has always been good at things and knows it without being obnoxious about it. The shorter one was compact and watchful and red-haired, and both of them were looking at Harry with the combined expression of people who have knocked on a door and had it answered in a way they did not anticipate. James Potter. And Peter Pettigrew. Harry had known, abstractly, that this would happen. He'd run the probability when he decided to contact Dumbledore and had factored it in. Running the probability and standing in front of his father at 21 years old were, it turned out, entirely different experiences, and he spent exactly 2 seconds having that experience before he put it somewhere internal and locked it and got on with the situation. James Potter was 20 years old and wearing a winter coat over plain robes and looking at Harry with the wand-alert eyes of someone who has been in an active war long enough to be cautious and young enough to still lead with expression rather than mask. He looked, there was no other word, Harry thought, familiar, in the specific way of seeing a face you know in a context that makes it strange. Harry Potter, James said slowly, the name clearly not meaning anything to him. Dumbledore got your letter 20 minutes ago. He sent us to verify the situation before committing to a meeting. Smart, Harry said. Come in. Neither of them moved. You live here? Peter said. He had a careful voice, attentive, the kind that missed nothing and gave away less. Harry looked at him and felt the specific complicated thing of knowing what Peter Pettigrew was going to become, and set it aside. Not now. Everything in its time. I'm a guest, Harry said. Of the house's blood law. It's complicated. Come in and I'll explain it, or stand on the step and catch cold, your preference. James and Peter exchanged a look. It was a quick look, fluent with the shorthand of people who've known each other a long time. Harry recognized its grammar even though he'd never seen these two people use it before. Then James stepped inside. Walburga had, apparently, taken herself to the sitting room and closed the door, which was either strategic courtesy or offended dignity or both. Harry led the two of them into the kitchen, which was the most neutral room in the house, and they sat. James looked around the kitchen of Grimmauld Place with the careful eyes of someone doing surveillance and the involuntary eyes of someone who has heard about this house from a friend and is mapping the description against the reality. He landed on Harry and stayed there. You're not on any of our records, he said. Any of the orders. Any ministry file we could access. Harry Potter doesn't exist in any document we could find in the last half hour. That's correct, Harry said. I'm new. New, Peter repeated. To this time, Harry said, and watched both of them absorb it. James's expression shifted. He was fast, quicker than Harry expected, or perhaps exactly as quick as he should have expected. Something clicked behind his eyes. Temporal displacement, Harry said. From the future. How far I won't say yet, because that information is dangerous, but far enough that I know significant things about the current war that I am willing to share with Dumbledore in the right context. How do we know you're not a Death Eater plant? James said. Blunt, direct, not aggressive, just honest about the question he was asking. You don't, Harry said. Yet. I could prove it a number of ways, but the most useful one is this. He looked at James carefully. Bathilda Bagshot lives in Godric's Hollow. She keeps in her attic a letter from Albus Dumbledore dated July 1899, addressed to Gellert Grindelwald, which begins, "Your point about Muggleborns is, I think, a perspective I may need to examine more carefully. Dumbledore has told no living person about that letter. Ask him if that's accurate before you make a judgment about me." James stared at him. Peter said nothing. Was watching Harry with an attention Harry was very careful not to react to. "The other thing I'll tell you," Harry said, "is that the Order has a security problem it hasn't identified yet. There's an information leak that's been active for at least 6 months. I know who it is, but I'm going to tell Dumbledore directly, not through intermediaries, because," he looked between them. "Because the information is sensitive enough that the fewer people who know it before it's acted on, the better." James's jaw had tightened. "You're saying someone in the Order." "I'm saying I'll tell Dumbledore," Harry said, firmly and not unkindly. "Today. If he agrees to meet me." He held James's gaze. "I know this is a lot to take on trust. I know you don't know me. But I promise you that everything I have to tell Dumbledore is in service of ending this war and getting people home safely. Including people you care about very much." The weight of that last sentence landed in a way Harry hadn't entirely intended but didn't take back. James's expression did something complicated, the instinct of a soldier trying to stay analytical when a stranger has just implied they know something personal. "Who are you?" he said. Not hostile. Genuinely searching. "Someone with very specific reasons to want this war over," Harry said. "That's all I'm giving you today." Another one of those fluent looks between James and Peter. James looked at the table for a moment, at his own hands, and Harry watched his father think, the way he'd seen Sirius describe it, the way he'd imagined it, the rapid decisive processing of a young man who was going to grow into someone extraordinary and didn't quite know it yet. Then James looked up. "I'll relay the message," he said. "Dumbledore will decide." "That's all I asked," Harry said. James stood. Looked at Harry one more time with the searching quality. "Your name," he said. "Potter." "Old family?" "Quite old," Harry said. "I'm a Potter," James said. "I know," Harry said. "We might be distantly related. It's worth looking into sometime." He said it with a calm that cost him more than James could see and that the bond registered. There was a faint pulse from the back of the house, Bellatrix picking up the emotional spike he'd locked down, her awareness a warm checking in pressure, and he released the lock just enough to let it settle. James nodded, not entirely satisfied but professional enough to table it. He and Peter went to the front door. Harry followed. Peter turned at the threshold with a small careful smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Dumbledore will send a response by nightfall," he said. "Thank you," Harry said. He closed the door. Stood in the hall for a moment. Then walked to the back of the house, through the kitchen, into the small cold parlor where Bellatrix was standing at the window with her arms folded and her back to him, and she turned when he came in. "That was James Potter," she said. "Yes." "And Peter Pettigrew." "Yes." She looked at him. The bond was doing its work and she'd had 20 minutes with nothing to do but read what it was carrying. Her expression was careful and quiet. "You knew them," she said. "Knowing them mattered to you." "Yes," Harry said. She didn't ask more. She held his gaze for a moment and then looked away, and Harry understood that she was giving him the room to have something private in exactly the way he'd given her the same thing when she'd looked at this house the morning they arrived, and he was grateful for it with a warmth that the bond immediately carried back to her. She felt it. He watched her register it. She looked at the floor briefly, the smallest possible acknowledgement, and then said, "Walburga wants to talk to us both. Something about the blood law documentation." "Let's go," Harry said. Walburga was in the study at the back of the first floor, which turned out to be a room so dense with books and documents that Harry could barely see the desk beneath the papers. She was standing with a large leather-bound volume open on a reading stand, the Black Family Blood Law Registry, generations of entries in different hands. The vinculum antiquum requires formal notation, she said, without preamble. Within 3 days of activation, both parties must notarize the bond in the family registry for it to have full legal standing under Wisengamot blood law. Without notation, it exists magically but not legally, which means Rodolphus's counsel could challenge it. Then we notarize it, Harry said. Walburga looked at him, then at Bellatrix. It requires blood notation. From both parties. And from the senior family head, who is, she paused. Myself, currently. Arcturus is, something moved through her expression that was old and familial and none of Harry's business. Ill. He is ill and not available. I am acting head. What does it involve? Bellatrix said, approaching the registry. A blood signature, Walburga said. A spoken attestation. And the registry acknowledges the magic with a response. It's self-confirming, the book recognizes genuine bond magic and will only accept the notation if the bond is real and in the state claimed. She looked at Harry. This is also, she added, a declaration of legal personhood within the House of Black. Once notarized, you have standing. Name, rights, the protection of the house's legal apparatus. And the Lestrange betrothal contract goes into full abeyance, Harry said. Full and formal, Walburga confirmed. Bellatrix was looking at the registry. At the generations of black names. Her face was doing the controlled version of something complicated. Harry stood beside her and looked at the open page, the most recent entries, cramped family records, births and bonds and deaths, and he thought about the tapestry he'd seen in this house in the future, the burned-off names, and the ones still there, and what it meant to add one. Ready? Walburga said. They both signed. The blood notations, just a small cut on the palm, the registry absorbed the blood with the self-confirming solemnity of old magic, and the spoken attestation, which Walburga led them through in formal Old English that Harry mostly followed and Bellatrix clearly knew by rote. When it was done the book glowed briefly, deep blue-black, the black family color, and the notation appeared in ink that looked permanent because it was. Walburga closed the registry with the care of someone handling something sacred. It's done, she said. Legal and magical both. She looked at Harry. You are now, formally, a member of this family's bond record. The house knows you. The magic knows you. She paused. And I suppose, she said, with the closest thing to warmth Harry had heard from her, so do I. The afternoon moved into early evening and Dumbledore's response arrived by owl at 5 o'clock. It was, as Harry had half expected, a request to meet that evening. The 3 Broomsticks, Hogsmeade, 7 o'clock. Bring whoever you trust. Come alone if you prefer. I am, as you suspected I would be, extremely curious. A.D. Harry read it and passed it to Bellatrix and she read it and her mouth formed a thin line. Hogsmeade, she said. Neutral ground, Harry said. Magical village. Public enough to be safe, removed enough to have privacy. He looked at her. You're coming. I am absolutely not, you are, Harry said. The bond notation gives you legal standing and the blood law protection applies in all venues. Dumbledore needs to see us both. He needs to understand the full situation, and trying to explain you without you present is a worse option than whatever his reaction will be. His reaction, she said flatly, will be that I am one of Voldemort's most active Death Eaters. His reaction, Harry said, will be that the situation is complicated and interesting and that he needs more information. Which is Dumbledore's reaction to almost everything. He paused. He's the one person I know who will hear what I have to say and not immediately try to arrest you. You're very confident about that. Yes, Harry said simply. She held his gaze. The bond between them was open and clear, and she was reading him. He knew she was, could feel the attention of it, the bond's emotional channel carrying her assessment of his certainty, its quality and its ground. He let her read it fully. He wasn't performing confidence. He was confident, and there was a difference. "Fine," she said. "But if he reaches for his wand, he won't," Harry said. "And if he does, I'll deal with it." "You'll deal with Albus Dumbledore." "I'll deal with the situation," Harry said. "Which might involve Albus Dumbledore needing to understand something quickly." She stared at him for a moment with the expression that had become familiar, the one that recalibrated upward despite itself. "You're extraordinary, you know," she said, and it came out with a quality that meant it entirely and hadn't meant to say it, and she moved past it immediately by asking Walburga about Fleur connections to Hogsmeade. They arrived at the Three Broomsticks at 7:03, which was late enough to be after Dumbledore and early enough not to seem anxious. The pub was busy in the way of a cold Wednesday evening, locals rather than tourists, noise and warmth and the smell of butterbeer. Harry navigated through it without ceremony, Bellatrix half a step behind him, and found the back corner table where Dumbledore was already sitting with a glass of something warm and an expression of absolute composed attention. He looked the same as Harry remembered. Older than the portraits but younger than the Dumbledore Harry had known, his beard was more auburn than white, his eyes had the same quality of depth, and he was dressed in robes of an extraordinary purple with silver detail that should have looked absurd and somehow didn't. He looked at Harry when they approached, and his expression did something that Harry found, despite everything, moving, a flicker of surprise, quickly managed, at the quality of what was in front of him. Then his eyes moved to Bellatrix and the expression became more complex. They sat. Dumbledore looked between them and said, in a voice that was warm and careful and gave nothing away, "Mr. Potter." "Miss Black. I confess the combination is not what I anticipated." "The situation is complicated," Harry said. "It generally is," Dumbledore said, "when it's interesting." His eyes returned to Harry with the full weight of his attention, which was, Harry had always thought, one of the most significant things he'd ever experienced. Dumbledore's full attention felt like being accurately seen by something very large and very wise. "The letter you sent. The flannel reference. The security concern." He paused. "The temporal displacement, which James relayed and which I find I believe, though I would like to understand the mechanism." "Yaxley," Harry said. "A ritual charge detonated at the wrong moment in a magical conflict. I went through the tear rather than over it." "And from how far?" Harry looked at him. "Far enough that I know what happens if the war continues on its current trajectory." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "Far enough that I know what Voldemort is and what he's made, and far enough that I watched people I loved die for years trying to stop what I can tell you how to stop now." Dumbledore was very still. "That is a significant claim." "It's a significant situation," Harry said. "I'm not here to be cautious, Professor. I'm here to end this faster than it ended the first time, and I need your help to do it." A pause. Dumbledore looked at Bellatrix with the gentle, penetrating quality of a man who has spent decades reading people and trusts the reading. "Miss Black," he said. "The vinculum antiquum is very old magic. How do you find it?" Bellatrix met his gaze with the controlled composure of someone in uncomfortable territory maintaining perfect form. "Accelerating," she said. "Currently in the second layer. The legal notation was completed this afternoon." "And you are here willingly," Dumbledore said. "Not a challenge. A genuine question." "I am here," Bellatrix said, "because the alternative is a version of my life that I have reasons to reconsider, and because this man," she stopped. Chose words carefully. "Has given me reasons to reconsider them. I'm not defecting. I'm not your asset. I am, in a situation that is evolving." Dumbledore looked at her for a moment and then did something Harry hadn't expected. He smiled. Briefly and genuinely. "That," he said, "is the most honest thing I have heard in some time." He looked back at Harry. The security leak. Yes, Harry said. I'll tell you, and I'll tell you alone. Not tonight. I need your word that you'll act on it carefully and without endangering the source of my knowledge. My word, Dumbledore said. Your word, Harry confirmed. Not a promise to investigate. Your word that you'll act when and how I recommend, because the situation is more fragile than you know, and moving on it wrong will cost more than moving on it right. Dumbledore studied him. The full-weight attention again, that extraordinary focused intelligence. Harry sat under it without moving. He wasn't asking for trust on blank credit. He was asking for the kind of specific, bounded trust that could be given to a stranger in a pub if the stranger had already demonstrated they held real information and had offered it freely. My word, Dumbledore said. On the condition that you tell me enough to understand why. Done, Harry said. He leaned forward and said the name quietly, and watched Dumbledore's expression go very still and very careful, and the stillness was the specific stillness of someone receiving information that fits into a pattern they've been trying to complete for a long time. How certain, Dumbledore said, his voice absolutely level. Certain, Harry said. The mechanism, tonight, Harry said, I'll give you everything I can about mechanism and timeline. Not here, somewhere private. Tomorrow or the next day. He paused. Because tomorrow Voldemort is going to move. He's going to send someone, probably several someones, to reclaim Bellatrix, and I need to deal with that first. Then we talk. Dumbledore looked at Bellatrix again. He'll send for you directly, he said. The mark is muffled, Harry said. I built a ward on it. That bought time, but it's not permanent, and when Rodolphus reports to him and the direct call fails, he'll escalate to personal contact. And when he does? Dumbledore said. I'm going to meet him, Harry said. The table was quiet for a moment. Dumbledore looked at Harry with the full weight of a man who has spent 40 years fighting the darkest wizard of the age and has never, in Harry's knowledge, heard anyone propose walking into Voldemort's direct presence voluntarily except himself. You understand what you're proposing, Dumbledore said. Completely, Harry said. And you believe you can, walk in and walk out, Harry said. Yes. I know what he is. I know what he fears. I know the specific pressure points that make him cautious rather than aggressive, and I know how to be something he has to assess rather than attack. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. He wants to know what I am. That's leverage. As long as he wants to know, he won't move against me, because Voldemort doesn't destroy things he doesn't understand. He studies them. Until he thinks he does understand, Dumbledore said. By which time I'll have changed the variables, Harry said. A long pause. Dumbledore looked between Harry and Bellatrix with the expression of a man watching something he doesn't fully understand but recognizes as significant. You are, he said to Harry, and stopped. Tried again. There is something about you that I cannot, he stopped again. The blue eyes were very steady and very searching. You have faced him before, he said quietly. Personally. Several times, Harry said. And you are not afraid of him. No, Harry said. Are you? Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. No, he said, and it was the answer of a man who is honest about the internal landscape. But I have a great respect for what he is capable of. So do I, Harry said. They're not the same thing. A pause. Then, from beside him, Bellatrix said quietly, No. They're not. Harry looked at her. She was looking at Dumbledore with an expression that was careful and open and showed none of the contempt or hostility that the name Dumbledore had always carried for the version of her Harry had known. Something in the evening, the pub warmth, the conversation's honesty, had shifted registers slightly. Dumbledore noticed. Of course he did. He looked at Bellatrix with a gentleness that Harry thought the Bellatrix of the future would have hexed him for and that the Bellatrix beside him tonight received without flinching. Miss Black, Dumbledore said. I want you to know, and I say this not as a strategic overture but as a simple statement of fact, that there are people who would be very glad to know you were all right. Something moved through Bellatrix's face too quickly to be catalogued. I'm not all right, she said flatly. I'm in a pub in Hogsmeade in a legally complex situation with a man from the future and the head of the opposing side. A pause, and the very slightest edge of something that might, in better circumstances, have been wry. But I'm present. Which is different. Dumbledore looked at her for a moment and then, very quietly, smiled. Indeed it is, he said. They stayed for another hour. Harry talked and Dumbledore listened, and Bellatrix contributed twice more with the precision of someone who knows exactly what to give and what to hold back, and by the time they left the pub Harry had the shape of an agreement, not formal, not written, but real. Dumbledore would not move against the Grimmauld Place arrangement, would make no order deployment until Harry had handled Voldemort's approach. In exchange Harry would give him the identity of the leak and everything he held about the Horcruxes in a proper meeting within 48 hours. On the street outside, cold and quiet, Dumbledore shook Harry's hand. The grip was firm and the blue eyes were, for a moment, completely unshielded. I have been hoping, Dumbledore said quietly, for a very long time, for someone who could do what you're describing. I had begun to think, he stopped. Never mind what I had begun to think. Good night, Mr. Potter. Miss Black. He walked away into the Hogsmeade dark, and Harry and Bellatrix stood on the street and watched him go. He knew, Bellatrix said. Didn't he? There was something in the way he looked at you. As though he recognized, not you specifically, but something you represent. Maybe, Harry said. Dumbledore always knew more than he showed. She turned to look at him in the cold air. Her face was unguarded in the way it sometimes was in the evening, when the day had processed far enough that the defenses were running on maintenance rather than active. He said people would be glad to know I was all right, she said. Yes, Harry said. Who did he mean, she said, and the question had a quality of someone asking something they half know the answer to and are checking it against hope. Harry thought about Sirius. About a 20-year-old young man who had burned off the family connection and probably carried the specific grief of that, not regret exactly, but the loss of something that could have been. About what it might mean to him that his cousin was, against all probability, in different terrain. Someone who lost you, Harry said. Someone who still would rather not have. She looked at him for a long moment, and the bond between them was open and clear, and what it carried from her was the specific quality of someone encountering something they had stopped expecting to find. Something like being found after a long time of being missing and not having realized it. She looked away. We should go back, she said. Yes, Harry said. They walked to the apparition point side by side, shoulders almost touching in the narrow street, and the night was cold and full of stars through a gap in the clouds, and somewhere in London Voldemort was assembling his next move, and somewhere in Hogsmeade Dumbledore was walking back to his carriage with new information turning over in a great mind, and at Grimmauld Place Walburga Black was probably in her study with the family registry still open. And Harry Potter and Bellatrix Black walked through a cold Scottish night with the bond between them warm and present, and neither of them said anything more, and the silence was comfortable in a way it hadn't been 2 days ago, which was itself a kind of answer to the question neither of them had quite asked yet. Chapter 5, The Dark Lord's Audience. The summons came at dawn. Harry felt it before Bellatrix did, or rather, he felt her feel it, the bond carrying the sensation across the house in the way it carried everything now, immediate and precise. He was already sitting up in bed when it hit, the ward he'd built over the mark flaring in his magical awareness like a coal being blown on. Hot and urgent. The muffling held, but only just. Whatever Voldemort had sent through the channel this morning was stronger than the daily call, more deliberate, shaped with intent rather than routine. He was dressed and in the corridor before she opened her door. She stood in the doorway with her left forearm pressed flat against her opposite hand, eyes sharp and face controlled, the mark clearly doing something unpleasant even through the ward. It's not holding, she said. I know, Harry said. How long? An hour, she said. Maybe less. The ward it's being worked against actively. He's not just calling, he's pushing. She met his eyes. This isn't Rodolphus's report. He already knew before that. Someone inside the order told him. Harry went very still. Who has Order access and Death Eater access simultaneously? Besides me in this current situation, she said dryly, and then the dryness faded. There's someone. Has been for months. Someone I've met at briefings, I don't know the name, I know the information was too specific, too tactical to be general surveillance. She looked at Harry. Your leak. Yes, Harry said. I told Dumbledore last night. He knows. Then whoever it is knows Dumbledore knows, or will know soon. She looked at the arm. Which means Voldemort was told last night about the Hogsmeade meeting. About you. The shape of it clicked. The morning push through the mark wasn't Rodolphus's report, it was a response to intelligence about Harry himself. Voldemort had heard there was a temporal displacement, an unknown wizard of significant power, bound to his best weapon through blood law. That was a different category of problem from a missing Death Eater. That warranted a personal summons. He wants to see you, Harry said. He wants to verify I'm not compromised, Bellatrix said. And he wants to see who you are. Then let's give him exactly that, Harry said. She looked at him steadily. You're going to tell me again that you want to walk into a meeting with the Dark Lord. I'm going to tell you, Harry said, that we're going to walk into a meeting with Voldemort on terms we control, at a time we choose, with preparation we've made. Not reactive. Not dragged. He held her gaze. The ward will hold for an hour. We have that hour to prepare and then we go. We, she said. We, Harry confirmed. You're not walking in there alone with the bond half-active and me on the other side of London. The magic won't allow it to be clean, he'll feel the bond in your signature and that becomes a liability you can't explain from a position of strength. Bring me. Explain it on our terms. Control the narrative. She was quiet for a moment, reading him through the bond. He felt her doing it, the careful attention, checking his certainty against its foundations. You've met him before, she said. Not just faced him in battle. Talked to him. Yes, Harry said. And you're not, she stopped. Afraid, Harry said. No. I told you. I know you told me, she said. I'm trying to understand it. Most people who've met him and come back from it are changed by the proximity. The fear he generates is partly magical, partly just what he is. Very few people can be near him and remain themselves. Harry thought about this honestly. About the graveyard, the ministry, the forest, the final confrontation. About standing in front of Tom Riddle across every version of their long strange relationship and what it had felt like. He tried to kill me before I could form complete sentences, Harry said. When I was a year old. And then again, and again, for most of my life. At some point you run out of fear of something that's specific. He paused. I also understand him. Not sympathetically, clearly. What he wants, what he is, what makes him move. That's a different kind of protection from fear. Better, actually. She held the look. Something in her face was doing the complex revision she'd been doing since the forest, the ongoing recalibration. He'll try to read you, she said. Legilimency. He does it reflexively in any significant meeting. Let him try, Harry said. Harry, let him try, Harry said again, steadily. He won't get what he's looking for. My occlumency isn't the performed blank wall kind, it's integrated, developed under pressure, and specific. I can show him exactly what I want him to see and nothing else. He paused. Actually, his trying to read me is useful. There are things I want him to know. Things I want planted at depth rather than said aloud. She stared at him. You're going to let the Dark Lord into your mind deliberately and show him curated content. Yes, Harry said. That is either genius or catastrophic. Those have always been my two settings, Harry said. Get dressed. I'll talk to Walburga. Walburga received the news the way she received most things, with absolute composure that covered something more turbulent at depth. She stood in her bedroom doorway in her dressing gown, having been woken at 6:30, and listened to Harry explain the situation without interrupting, and when he finished she looked at Bellatrix behind him and then back at Harry. You're going to him, she said. We're going to him, Harry said. Controlled meeting, our terms of attendance. The blood law and the bond notation are our legal scaffolding. He can't act against either of us openly without undermining his own standing with the families who support him. He'll want information. We'll exchange what's useful and withhold the rest. And if he decides that information isn't sufficient? Then we leave, Harry said. Forcibly if necessary. Walburga was quiet. Her eyes moved between Harry and Bellatrix with an expression that was old and familial and afraid in the specific way of someone who has spent decades not allowing themselves to be afraid and finds it resurfacing now in proximity to something they cannot control. Bellatrix, she said quietly. I'll be fine, Bellatrix said. You don't know that. Aunt Walburga. Bellatrix's voice was quiet and even. I've been in his presence 100 times. I know how to manage it. You've been in his presence as his servant, Walburga said sharply. This is different. You'll be there as, she looked at Harry. As something else. That changes the dynamic in ways neither of you can fully predict. She's right, Harry said. We can't fully predict it. But the alternative is waiting for him to force the meeting on his terms and timeline, which is worse. He met Walburga's eyes. I'll bring her home. It was the right thing to say and the wrong time to notice that it was the right thing, but Walburga's expression did something very small and very significant, a crack in the composure, quickly sealed. See that you do, she said, and went back into her room and closed the door, and they could hear her moving inside with the precise controlled purpose of someone who needs to do something with their hands. They ate quickly, stood over the kitchen table with toast and tea and went through what they knew. Voldemort's current base of operations was a manor in the Scottish borders. Bellatrix knew the location and could apparate them to the approach point. His inner circle at any given meeting was typically 4 to 6, almost always including Lucius Malfoy and Bartemius Crouch's son in the months he'd been newly marked. The room he used for significant meetings was a study on the first floor, north-facing, 1 door, 2 windows. He preferred to be seated when receiving visitors because it gave him the height differential of a seated man being approached. He'll stand when he sees me, Harry said. He won't be able to help it. Bellatrix looked at him. You know this. I know him, Harry said. He stands when something interests him. He can't fully suppress the physical tell. What do you want him to understand from the meeting, she said. Not managing his plan, genuinely asking, because they were building this together and she understood her role in it. 3 things, Harry said. First, that I'm not affiliated with Dumbledore. Not an Order asset, not a weapon Dumbledore has deployed. I'm my own. Second, that the bond with you is legal, permanent, and magically real, and moving against it costs him politically and magically with the families he relies on. Third, he paused. That I'm dangerous in a way he can't categorize and that should make him cautious. The third one, she said slowly, is the most important. Yes, Harry said. Voldemort attacks what he understands. He studies what he doesn't. I need to be the second kind of problem for as long as possible. And what do I do, she said. Be exactly who you are, Harry said. Not his servant. Not my, whatever he'll try to frame you as. Yourself. The bond is between equals and he needs to see that before he decides what it means. She held his gaze for a moment, and the bond carried something from her, not nerves, nothing so simple, but a kind of heightened aliveness, the quality of someone moving into terrain they know well enough to navigate and are alert to. "All right," she said. They left at 7:30. She took his wrist in the forest grip and they operated in stages, 2 hops to clear the London wards, a third to the Scottish border approach, landing in a field of dead winter grass with a stone wall on one side and a grey sky pressing down overhead. The manor was visible on the ridge above them, large, dark-stoned, the kind of building that had been something else before it became this. Not elegant. Functional in the way of a fortress. Harry looked up at it and noted the wards from the outside, multiple layers, well-maintained, with the dark signature of their maker running through them like a watermark. Good work. Very good work. The man had been, whatever else you said about him, an extraordinary magical talent. He'll have felt us apparate to the approach point, Bellatrix said. Good, Harry said. I want him to know we came voluntarily. They walked up the field to the manor gate, which was iron and very tall, and watched them come with the specific sentient quality of wards that have been fed intent. Harry cast nothing. Just walked. Bellatrix walked beside him, not a step behind, and the bond between them in the cold morning air was something he could almost see, warm against the grey, pulling gently toward shared ground. The gate opened before they reached it. The interior of the manor was not what Harry would have designed if he'd been a Dark Lord furnishing his private headquarters, which was an idle thought he set aside. Stone floors, high ceilings, minimal decoration, not austere exactly but purposeful, everything in service of a certain idea of itself. 2 Death Eaters flanked the entrance hall, masked, hands visible. Watching. Harry looked at them and they didn't speak, and neither did he. A 3rd Death Eater came from the corridor, unmasked, blonde, composed in the way of expensive upbringing. Lucius Malfoy was 22 and looked like an early, slightly less polished version of himself, and looked at Harry with the perfectly maintained neutral expression of a man who has spent his entire life performing superiority and is currently encountering something he can't quite place in his hierarchy. He looked at Bellatrix. Bellatrix, he said, carefully. Lucius, she said, and her voice was the same register it had always been with Lucius, not warm, not cold, the specific tone of colleagues who respect each other's competence and nothing else. The Dark Lord is expecting you, Lucius said. He was looking at Harry again. Both of you, it seems. Then let's not keep him waiting, Harry said. Lucius led them up a staircase and through 2 corridors and stopped before a door that Harry would have identified by feel before he saw it. The wards on it were extraordinary, concentric, with a specific signature at the center that he'd felt before, in Horcruxes, in the diary, in the ring, the same consciousness anchored in different substrates. He let the recognition pass through him and kept walking. Lucius opened the door. The study was exactly as Bellatrix had described. North-facing windows showing grey sky and winter field. A fireplace on the east wall, fire burning. Good furniture, old, the kind of thing that had been in the house before this occupant arrived. And a desk at the far end, behind which sat a figure who was, regardless of Harry's preparation, always somehow more than the preparation accounted for. Lord Voldemort was tall and pale and still in the way of things that do not need to move to project threat. He was wearing black, no robes, a style that Harry had always found slightly unsettling because it was so deliberate, the choice of a man who had discarded all the ceremonial apparatus of wizarding tradition because he considered himself to have transcended it. He had a face that was, at this point in the timeline, still mostly human, the features not yet fully eroded by the soul-splitting, the eyes red-tinged but not fully red, the nose still present. Tom Riddle's extraordinary looks, worn down to something harder and stranger. He was looking at Harry, and he stood up. Harry noted this with the internal precision of something confirmed. Bellatrix's composure was extraordinary. He felt through the bond the particular quality of her management, the way she'd learned to be near this man, the specific suppression of self that years of service had built, and underneath it the new thing, the resistance, the part of her that the last 3 days had been reinforcing, and she held both simultaneously with a control that was genuinely impressive. "Bellatrix," Voldemort said, and his voice was the thing Harry remembered most from the memories and the brief encounter in the Ministry, that extraordinary quality of it, the voice of a man who had spent decades ensuring that his voice was the most significant sound in any room. He said her name not as greeting but as inventory. "Checking a thing. You are well." "Yes," Bellatrix said. "You have been," a pause, the eyes moving to Harry with the specific controlled curiosity of a man who does not show full curiosity. "Occupied." "My lord," Bellatrix said, with the formal address that she'd told Harry last night she would use because removing it would alarm him more than keeping it, "may I present Harry Potter? A wizard of the Peveril line, currently bound to House Black by the Vinculum Antiquum, legally notarized yesterday." Voldemort looked at Harry. Harry looked back at Voldemort. The legitimacy came immediately, not aggressive, the way Harry had experienced it in their previous lives, but subtle, the way a hand slides into a pocket. "Expert." Harry let it in. He'd prepared specific memories to present, the temporal displacement, the sensation of falling through time, the Wiltshire forest, the spell fire. Nothing that gave timeline. Nothing that gave information. The surface of events, calibrated to show power without explanation. Then he let Voldemort feel the edge of what he was keeping back. Not the content, just the fact of depth. The ocean floor quality of a mind that contains vastly more than what's on the surface. He felt Voldemort's legitimacy touch that depth and pause, the pause of someone who has reached the edge of something they expected to be shallow and found it was not, and he watched Voldemort's expression remain perfectly controlled and watched his eyes move. "Sit," Voldemort said. The word was directed at both of them and Harry sat and Bellatrix sat and Voldemort remained standing, which was a recalibration Harry noted. He'd stood to greet them, now he was staying up because sitting would be a concession to something he hadn't decided about yet. "The Peveril line," Voldemort said. His voice was interested in the careful way of a collector hearing a provenance claim. "Documented?" "The magic is self-documenting," Harry said. "You felt it when you were looking." A pause. "I felt a great many things," Voldemort said, "when I was looking." He studied Harry. "You came from the future." "Yes." "How far?" "Far enough," Harry said. The same answer he'd given to James, to Walburga, to Dumbledore. It was the right answer because the only alternatives were too specific or too vague and either one gave something away. "And what did the future show you?" Voldemort said, "that brought you to my door." "I didn't come to your door," Harry said. "You called Bellatrix. She brought me because the bond is in its second layer and separation at this stage is physically impractical." He kept his voice even and conversational, not deferential, not combative. The tone of someone making a factual statement. "I came because it made more sense to be here voluntarily than to have you send people." Something moved in Voldemort's expression. Very small. The specific micro-adjustment of a man who has calculated from position A to position B and found that his interlocutor is already at position B. "You anticipated the summons," he said. "You're predictable in certain ways," Harry said, and felt the air in the room do something. Behind him, he suspected Lucius Malfoy was having a minor cardiac event. That's not a criticism. The predictable patterns are the intelligent ones. You wouldn't compromise Bellatrix's position without understanding the threat first. Anyone who'd tell you otherwise doesn't understand you. Voldemort looked at him for a long time. The red-tinged eyes moved over Harry's face with the sustained attention of a man who has learned that the surface of things is rarely the truth of them. "You are not afraid of me," he said. "No," Harry said. "Most people who sit where you're sitting are afraid of me," Voldemort said. "Correctly. I've been in worse situations," Harry said simply. "Have you?" Voldemort said. And for a moment, just a moment, the extraordinary intelligence behind those eyes was entirely visible, all the performance stripped back, the genuine towering mind working. Harry had always thought it was the saddest thing about Tom Riddle, that intelligence. What it might have been, aimed differently. What situations, precisely, in a life that has barely reached its third decade, would be worse than this room? Your future self's plans for me, Harry said evenly. Fairly comprehensively worse. The room was absolutely silent. Voldemort did not move. Did not change expression. But something shifted in the quality of his stillness, from the stillness of control to the stillness of a man who has received significant information and is processing it with full capacity. His eyes had gone very sharp. My future self, he said. The version of you that exists 22 years from now, Harry said. Who had specific and detailed plans for my life and executed most of them. The experience was educational. And yet here you are, Voldemort said, almost softly. And yet here I am, Harry confirmed. A pause. Then Voldemort walked from behind the desk, not toward Harry aggressively, not retreating, just moving, the way a man moves when he's thinking and the thought requires space. He went to the window and looked out at the grey field for a moment, and Harry watched his back and felt Bellatrix beside him very still, reading the room with the expertise of 3 years of inner circle presence. You know something about me, Voldemort said, still at the window. Something specific. From the future. Yes, Harry said. And you came here to tell me what? Nothing yet, Harry said. I came here because you called Bellatrix and I came with her because the bond requires proximity. I'll tell you things when I decide it's useful for both of us, and I'll tell you what I choose. He paused. What I want from this meeting is simple. I want you to understand that the vinculum antiquum is legally real, magically permanent, and binding on both parties. I want you to understand that Bellatrix Black is not compromised, she's in a situation that the blood law of her family created, and the appropriate response to that, under the law your supporters respect, is acknowledgement rather than opposition. Voldemort turned from the window. You want me to release her from active service. I want you to understand that she has a legal obligation to the bond that supersedes your claim on her time, Harry said. Not permanently. The bond requires consolidation, months, not years. After that, she's her own person and can make her own choices. He held Voldemort's gaze. I'm not asking you to lose a weapon. I'm asking you to acknowledge a law that half your supporters would cite against you if you ignored it. Voldemort looked at him. The assessment was complete and thorough and Harry felt the legitimacy probe again, stronger this time, no longer subtle, a deliberate push. Harry held his prepared surface and let the probe confirm what he wanted confirmed. The temporal displacement was real, the power behind it was real, the intent was not aligned with Dumbledore, the intent was, genuinely, independent. Then he let Voldemort feel the depth again. The vast dark calm of a mind that had held death and let it go. He didn't frame it, didn't label it. Just opened the door to the cellar for a moment and let Voldemort see the stairs going down. The probe withdrew. Voldemort was very still in a way he hadn't been before. The Peveril line, Voldemort said, and his voice had a different quality now, not warm, nothing like that, but the quality of a scholar encountering something in his field he hadn't expected to find. The Deathly Hallows are a legend. Most legends have a core of fact, Harry said. You carry them, Voldemort said. It wasn't a question. I carry what I carry, Harry said. The relevant point is what you choose to do with the next 10 minutes. Voldemort looked at him for a long moment, and Harry looked back, and the fire in the grate was the only thing moving in the room. Bellatrix was a warm steady presence at Harry's side, the bond between them a clear channel, and through it he felt her controlled alertness and underneath that something that was sharp and aware and directed at him, not fear, not uncertainty, something more like the feeling of watching someone do something that requires extraordinary skill performed with complete composure. The blood law notation, Voldemort said. Done, Harry said. Yesterday afternoon. Walburga Black co-signed as acting family head. Rodolphus's contract. In formal abeyance, Harry said. Standard provision for magical conflict of claim. The expression on Voldemort's face was the specific expression of a man absorbing a set of legal and political facts that he would, in different circumstances, simply override, and recognizing that the cost of overriding them in this specific configuration is higher than he wants to pay today. Harry watched him calculate it. The political capital among the pure-blood families. The legitimacy he derived from their support. The specific signal that disregarding the vinculum antiquum would send, at a moment when his movement was still consolidating. "You've been very careful," Voldemort said. "I've been thorough," Harry said. "Careful implies anxiety. I'm not anxious." Voldemort looked at him one more time with the full weight of what he was, the extraordinary intelligence, the centuries of magical study, the deep cold patience, the specific loneliness of a man who has made himself singular and finds the singularity is its own kind of cage, and Harry looked back and felt, as he always did at this moment of sustained direct contact with Voldemort, the thing that had always been true: Tom Riddle could have been remarkable. In a different life, he could have been genuinely, lastingly remarkable. He was still, in this life, the most dangerous man Harry had ever faced. 1 month, Voldemort said. The blood law consolidation period. I'll acknowledge the provision. He paused. After that, I will expect a conversation. I'll expect one too, Harry said. There are things I know about your future that you'll want to hear. When I decide the context is right. And you'll decide that. I'll decide that, Harry confirmed. Another pause. Voldemort's eyes moved to Bellatrix, the inventory look, checking a thing. You are well, he said again, the same words as before, but the tone was slightly different. Slightly. The difference between checking an object and checking something more complicated. Yes, Bellatrix said, and her voice was steady and entirely her own. The bond, Voldemort said to her quietly. You find it tolerable. Something shifted in her expression, an internal renegotiation, very fast, and she came out of it with an answer that was true and careful simultaneously. I find it, she said, illuminating. Voldemort looked at her for a moment longer. And then he looked at Harry, and something passed across his face that was gone so quickly Harry wasn't fully sure he'd seen it. Something between acknowledgement and the very faintest possible version of an emotion he'd been cutting out of himself for decades and had not, it seemed, fully succeeded. Then it was gone and the cold composure was back and he walked back to his desk and sat down, and the movement was a signal, audience concluding. Lucius will see you out, he said. Harry stood. Bellatrix stood. Harry looked at Voldemort one more time. One thing, he said. Voldemort looked at him. The objects you've been collecting, Harry said. The insurance. Whatever you're planning with them, I'd strongly recommend reconsidering the scope. He held Voldemort's gaze steadily. Not as a threat. As genuinely useful information from someone who's seen the end of that particular project. He paused. They're not what you think they are. The room was very still. Voldemort's expression was completely controlled. His hands on the desk were completely still. His eyes were the eyes of a man who has just been told something he cannot fully process in public and is filing it at a depth he will return to alone. You know about them, he said quietly. I know everything about them, Harry said. When you want to talk about it, I'm available. He held the gaze one more moment. I told you because you're too intelligent to hide things from when the information is already in play. And because what you're doing with them is going to cost you more than anything else you've ever done, and the cost doesn't have to be paid. He turned and walked to the door. Bellatrix walked beside him, and he felt through the bond her specific quality of controlled amazement, the internal equivalent of someone watching a tightrope walk from the ground. They went through the door and Lucius Malfoy was in the corridor. Having heard none of it, the room was warded, with his composed blonde face working hard at neutrality. This way, Lucius said. They walked out through the manor the way they'd walked in, and the two masked Death Eaters in the entrance hall watched them go, and the gate opened, and they walked down the winter field to the apparition point in the same side-by-side way they'd walked up it, and when they were clear of the manor wards Bellatrix stopped and turned to him. Her expression was extraordinary. Not the layered controlled one, not the fractured one, something new. Open and furious and something adjacent to odd, all at once, and the bond was wide open and what it carried from her was a feeling so full it didn't have a clean name. "You told him about the Horcruxes," she said. The word came out carefully, the word she'd never used aloud before, the word he'd confirmed for her last night when they'd run out of oblique language for the things she'd helped hide. "I gave him enough to think," Harry said. "Not enough to act." "He'll think about nothing else for a week," she said. "Good," Harry said. "A thinking Voldemort is better than a reacting Voldemort. I want his mind on this. I want him uncertain about whether the objects are safe and what I know about them, because that uncertainty is leverage we can use." He looked at her steadily. "He won't move against us while he's uncertain about what I am." "You told him you were the master of death," she said. "Not in words. But the legilimency, I showed him the edge of something," Harry said. "He'll draw his own conclusion. He always does, and he's usually right." A pause. "Let him be right about this one. It's not dangerous information in his hands. It's complicated information." She held his gaze and the morning was cold around them and the manor on the ridge was dark and closed behind them. She stopped. There was a moment. "When you mentioned the future and the cost of the objects." He almost looked. "I know," Harry said. "Tom Riddle is in there somewhere," she said, and the sentence had a quality that said this was something she'd thought before and had never said aloud. "Yes," Harry said. "He is. Buried under everything he's done to himself, but yes." He met her eyes. "Which is another reason not to write him off as simply a thing to destroy. He made choices. He can make different ones." A pause. "He won't. Probably. But it's worth leaving the door." She looked at him for a long time. "You're the strangest person I've ever met," she said, and the way she said it was nothing like insult. "I've been told," Harry said. A beat. The bond between them was full and clear and the morning was cold and the whole of the wizarding world was reconfigured slightly around what had just happened in that room. The Horcruxes named to their maker. The blood law acknowledged by the Dark Lord. The board shifted, all the pieces moved. "The leak," Bellatrix said suddenly, sharpening. "Dumbledore knows but he hasn't moved yet. If the leak knew we were going to Hogsmeade last night, he definitely knows about today. Whatever information is going to Voldemort, goes both ways," Harry said. "If Voldemort has a source in the Order has a source in Voldemort's camp. Which is leverage we need to handle before anything else blows. He was already working it through. Dumbledore needs to move on it today. I need to send him a message before the leak tells Voldemort what you said about the Horcruxes," Bellatrix said, snapping to the same conclusion simultaneously. "He'll assume Dumbledore knows, which changes his whole calculation, which means the 1-month window just got shorter," Harry said. "He'll be back on the problem immediately." "How long do we actually have?" she said. "Days," Harry said. "Maybe less." He looked at her. "We need Dumbledore today. And there's something else we need to do." "What?" she said. "The Horcrux you're holding," Harry said. "We need to move it. If Voldemort starts worrying about their safety, he'll send people to check, and if yours is where you put it, someone will find it whether they know what to look for or not." He held her gaze. "I know what it is and I know how to destroy it. The method is unpleasant but I've done it before. I need you to take me to it today, before we do anything else." She was quiet for a moment. He felt through the bond the weight of what she was carrying, not reluctance, exactly. More like the final crossing of a line. The thing she'd been held back from saying yes to completely, and was now saying yes to. "It's in Scotland," she said. Highland. A cave on a sea cliff I found 3 years ago. I've been the only person in or out. She met his eyes. It's safe. Will you take me there? Harry said. A pause. The winter field was silent around them. Yes, Bellatrix said. They operate in 3 hops north, moving up through Scotland in cold bright stages, and landed on a clifftop that overlooked the North Sea with the specific grey brutality of the Scottish winter coast. Below them the cliff dropped 50 meters to black water, and the sound of it, even from above, was immense and rhythmic and indifferent to everything. The cave was in the cliff face, accessible by a narrow path that Harry would have missed without Bellatrix's knowledge of it. They climbed down in the cold, hands on rock, the spray reaching them even at this height, and she led him along a ledge and through a turn in the rock and into a space that was dry and dark and utterly silent inside. She lit her wand. The cave was small, a natural pocket in the cliff, unremarkable in every way except that it couldn't be seen from above or below without specific knowledge of the path. She'd chosen well. In a natural shelf in the rock, wrapped in a preserving charm, sat a small golden cup. Harry recognized it. The Hufflepuff cup, one of Helga Hufflepuff's great artifacts, and inside it something old and fractured and malignant, a piece of a soul that had been put there by Axe. Harry didn't want to think about in specifics. Bellatrix unwrapped it, carefully, and held it out to him, and the expression on her face was the most complicated thing he'd seen from her. She was looking at the cup and then at Harry, and the bond was carrying something enormous, not guilt, not yet, the word wasn't right, but something that acknowledged weight. The weight of what she'd done and what it had been for and what she now thought of both those things. Harry took the cup. He held it in both hands and looked at it for a moment, feeling the dark magic in it, the wrongness of it, the specific sensation of something that shouldn't exist, and was in pain at the fact of its existence. The method is a basilisk fawn, he said. Which I don't have. But, he paused, and thought, and his mind went to what he had. The Elder Wand. The most powerful magical instrument in existence, which had been used to do things no other wand could do. Stand back, he said. He set the cup on the rock shelf. He held the Elder Wand and thought about what he needed, not a spell, exactly, not anything that existed in a textbook. An extension of intent. He was the master of death, and this was a fragment of a man who had run from death his entire life, and he thought about that, about what it meant to accept death and what it meant to refuse it, and he let the wand carry that intent. The light that came out of it was white and very still and utterly silent. Not dramatic. Nothing like the images Harry had seen of Horcrux destruction, no explosion, no screaming, no theatrical violence. Just a sustained white light pressing into the cup, and then a sound like a breath being let out, long and quiet, and then the cup was just a cup. Bellatrix was watching from behind him. He turned. Her expression was very still and very white. She was looking at the cup, ordinary gold now, the malignancy gone, the dark magic dispersed, with an expression that was doing something profound and private and painful. Is it? She said. Yes, Harry said. It's done. She was quiet for a long time. The sound of the sea filled the cave. Harry stood beside her and didn't speak, and the bond between them was open and full, and what it carried from her was the beginning of something that had no clean word, some internal reckoning that had started and would take a long time to complete, the particular grief of understanding what you've been part of from a position where you can no longer pretend otherwise. He reached over and put his hand over hers where it rested at her side, without ceremony, without announcement. She looked down at it and then looked out at the cave wall, and the bond registered the contact, and she didn't move her hand. They stayed like that for a moment. One down, Harry said quietly. How many are there? She said. Were there? Harry said carefully. Several. Some I know the locations of. Some we'll have to find. He looked at her. But we have time. And we have more information than anyone has ever had about this specific problem. He paused. And I've done it before. She turned to look at him in the cave's small wandlight, and her face was open in the way the last 3 days had been gradually making it open, not soft, not vulnerable, not those words, but present in a way that was its own kind of strength. "You've done all of this before," she said. "All of it. The war, the objects, the ending. You've carried it all once already." "Yes," Harry said. "And you came back through time and you're doing it again," she said. "Differently." Because the first time cost too much," Harry said. "Because I watched people I loved pay for outcomes I could have changed if I'd been stronger or faster or more willing to break the rules everyone kept insisting I follow." He held her gaze. "I'm not following anyone else's rules this time." She looked at him. The sea outside was vast and cold and permanent and completely indifferent, the way the world is when you're standing in it with something true. "Neither am I," she said. Harry looked at her for a moment, this woman who had been his enemy and was becoming something else, through magic and proximity and the specific alchemy of honesty between two people who had been dealing in nothing but for too long. "Good," he said. They climbed back up the cliff in the cold salt air and stood at the top with the sea behind them and Scotland stretching north, and Harry sent a Patronus to Dumbledore, a stag, steady and bright in the grey morning, carrying a message about urgency and the need to meet, and watched it run south through the cold air until it disappeared. Then they apparat home. Walburga met them in the entrance hall the moment the front door opened, her eyes going immediately to Bellatrix with the specific sharp quality of relief being managed by someone who considers relief undignified. She looked at Harry next with an expression that was assessment and something warmer and said simply, "Well?" "He acknowledged the bond provision," Harry said. 1 month. "And?" Walburga said, reading the rest of it off their faces. "And the war just changed shape," Harry said. "We need to talk to Dumbledore this afternoon." He looked at Walburga steadily. "All of us. Because what comes next is going to need this house, and this family, and everything we can build between now and the moment it arrives." Walburga Black looked at him for a long moment with the eyes of a woman who has watched her family diminish for decades and has been, against all reasonable expectation, given a reason to stop. "Tea first," she said. "Tea first," Harry agreed. And in the entrance hall of Grimmauld Place, with the bond warm and present in his chest and the sea salt still in his hair and 1 Horcrux destroyed and 5 more to find and a war to reshape from the inside out, Harry Potter felt, for the first time since the white light swallowed him in the Great Hall, something that was not strategy and not duty and not the grim momentum of someone running through a known sequence. He felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be.